So guys, what if Naruto secretly trained himself and got Infinite Potential Powers Grayfia as queen in high school movie? The Bael clan, one of the 72 pillars of the underworld and the highest ranking among them. The Bael held the rank of Great King. Being born into the clan guarantees you living and enjoying the finest devil society has to offer. Or so that's how it goes if you met two conditions, those conditions being that you inherit the clan's famous power of destruction. This grants the users immense explosive power that can completely annihilate things when used. The second condition is to be a part of the main family. If you fulfilled both of those conditions, then you're almost guaranteed everything your heart desires. However, if you're unfortunate enough to not meet those conditions, you're worth less than garbage in their eyes, some deeming you not even worthy of the ground you walk on. The Bael clan has always been big on tradition, more so than the other clans. Their belief is that if you don't possess their abilities, you're better off dead than being associated with them. Two such examples of clan members who weren't fortunate enough to meet the conditions were Saraorg Bael, the son of Lord Bael, who was recently sent away along with his mother for not having inherited the power of destruction. The second was a young blonde of 8 years old by the name of Naruto. The only son of the now deceased Minato and Kushina of the Bael clan branch family. Like Saraorg, he didn't inherit the power of destruction and was essentially non-existent to the main members of the clan. However, unlike his fellow clan member, he wasn't sent away to one of the properties like Saraorg had been. No, he wasn't that lucky, unfortunately. When he had asked why this was, all he was told was that Lord Bael owed someone a favor, and that was that. Not everyone treated him harshly though. Some of the maids of the family were kind enough to keep him well fed whenever they had a chance. Anything more than that and they'd potentially be discovered and punished. But for Naruto, that wasn't enough to offset being treated like he didn't exist for something he wasn't born with. What was worse was that while all the other kids his age were out getting their evil piece sets from Ajuka Beelzebub, one of the current Satans, all he could do was read old science books the clan didn't care for nor maintain. It really pissed him off. Why couldn't he have his own peerage? Even Saraorg, who was considered a failure, got one prior to him being shipped off. So what if he couldn't use that damn power? He could still be strong. Head asked them to teach him how to use magic, and with that he could be strong and not disgrace the Bael name like they were afraid of. Their response: he wasn't worth the effort. Even if he learned magic, he'd still be a Bael without the clan's signature ability. Damn them, Naruto said angrily as he glared at the mattress he was currently sitting on. His small hands curled into fists as he remembered all the conversations. Anytime he even tried to initiate a conversation, he was told to head to his room. He was honestly surprised he even had a room. Granted, it was a room at the furthest end of the manor, in a wing almost nobody visits, but still a room. Damn them, he yelled as he began punching the bed with everything he could muster. After 5 minutes of abusing his mattress, he stopped to take a few deep breaths. He righted himself and tried to calm down but found it difficult. Looking up, his attention was drawn to an old drawer that had been in the room since it became his. I'll show them all. At that point, something inside him changed. Almost instinctively, he swiped his hand horizontally in the direction of the dresser and watched in awe as the old dresser was sliced clean in half. He looked down at his hand, wondering what had just done. His hand didn't look any different. There was no magic circle in his hand or anything of the sort that could have caused what had happened. He closed his eyes and focused, trying to recreate the feeling had felt when he did it. After 10 minutes, he suddenly felt it. It was almost as if he was holding more solid air. Upon opening his eyes, he noticed the space around his palm was slightly distorted. Using his free hand, he tried to touch it and noticed that his hand would stop advancing the moment it touches the distorted space. He tried to push a little harder to no avail. All that happened was the slight flashes of purple and green when there was contact. It seemed the closer he tried getting his hands to touch, the harder it became, almost as if his hand was somehow slowing down. Unknown to him and the rest of the supernatural world, the moment he unlocked this ability, the balance of power in the world shifted dramatically. 4 years passed since Naruto unlocked what he believed was his innate devil ability, which he named Infinity. In that time, he's made leaps and bounds with it in secret. Unlike the power of destruction, which radiated power that drew everyone's attention, Infinity was much more discreet, which gave him the advantage of training to his heart's content. Had learned how it worked and how to control it. With it, he could increase his speed, which he practiced in the dead of night to make sure he wasn't seen, distort reality, like he did with the dresses 4 years ago. He even learned how to suspend himself in mid-air by manipulating the space around him. What he was most proud of, however, were the techniques he was currently working on. Had found a way to create techniques that brought divergence and convergence of infinity into reality to create devastating techniques. Those science books he read all those years ago really came in handy.
specifically those books relating to space and gravity. The Bale clan messed up having those available to him. He never practiced them at the clan manor, of course, nor did he do it when Lord Bale or the family was around in fear of being discovered before he was strong enough. Instead, he'd leave the manor and train in a secluded area far off in the devil countryside. Thankfully, no one bothered to look for him. Training with his power wasn't the only thing that had happened. One day he stumbled upon a gold mine. While he was training in a no longer used storage room, he found a rather interesting looking chess set and old out of date books on basic devil magic, which is how he was able to train in areas far away from the manor and prying eyes. He knew what the chess set was the moment he laid eyes on it, as he could feel the aura radiating off of it. It was light, but enough to be felt. It also looked different than the ones he'd seen others with. This one looked older and the pieces were different in their design. He figured they must have been there for a while considering the amount of dust covering the pieces. It wasn't how he imagined getting an evil piece set, but he wasn't complaining. It wasn't difficult to figure out how they worked either. He asked one of the maids that was nice to him, and she, knowing he never got a set, decided to humor him after he gave her his best pleading look. She explained the ins and outs of the set and how they were used to reincarnate others to help boost the devil population. He also made sure to ask if there were other types of sets, to which she responded that there were. What she described was exactly what he'd found. Naruto had come across one of the first evil piece sets Ajuka had created.
Apparently, some sets had side effects and the Bile clan refused to use a potentially faulty set. Those were their own words. Instead, they kept it stored away until the sets were later refined. The maid also told him that those sets are no longer created and that an old friend of hers died not too long after. Looking into why exactly the sets were completely overhauled. After that last bit, she clammed up and left him alone. After the explanation, it only left Naruto with more questions than answers. Following that, he made sure to hide the set and continue his secret training. Had also made up his mind that he was going to leave the underworld for a while. The moment he discovered the evil piece set, the thought had plagued his mind. Had leave the prejudice underworld and form the strongest peerage he could. Then had come back and show the Bile clan and everyone who thought like them, meaning almost all of the older families minus one or two, what real power looked like. The thought of the underworld losing their shit at the fact that one of the failures of the Bile clan was one of the strongest was what drove him to continue his harsh training, like it was right now, for instance. Naruto had just managed to complete another new technique after days of rigorous training and was working on another. His body hurt, he was tired, and his palm was slightly burned from all the concentrated demonic energy he focused in that area. If he wanted his plan to come to fruition, he needed to work through it. As he was about to try again, he stopped when he looked at the small clock he had nearby. Oh shit, it's almost starting, he said to himself. He summoned a magic circle on the ground and sat back as it projected an image in the air. He was really glad had found that old book, even if it was outdated. Not only was this basic spell good for transportation but broadcasting too. The broadcast he was interested in today was for a raiding game. It featured the current rank 2 devil Roygun Belphegor and someone he wasn't familiar with from the Agaras family. Currently, the broadcast was showing the people in attendance, seeing as the game hadn't started yet. Normally games are broadcasted only, but on occasions when a highly anticipated matchup is happening, in-person attendance is allowed, though they watch the actual match from a broadcast within the room. Those allowed in got to talk with the competitors both before and after a match. The image of the stage flashed for a minute before changing to show two of the four current Satans, Seerzex Lucifer and Ajuka Beelzebub, the only two among them that were classified as Super Devil due to their immense power. Though they were definitely imposing figures, his eyes were drawn to the person standing behind and to the right of Seerzex. She was a young-looking woman that could pass off for being in her 20s. She had long silver hair, a long braid on each side with small blue bows at the ends, while the rest was let down, which ended in twin braids. She had light red eyes and wore a blue and white maid outfit that, even someone as young as him could see, really hugged her figure well. She was easily the most beautiful woman had ever seen. Grayfia Lucifuge had heard about the woman but had never seen her. All he knew was that she was the maid for Seerzex and his family. Most believed that they were married, but that was disproved when the man himself said he was married to someone else. Even though she was simply standing there with an expressionless look on her face, he was captivated. Unfortunately for the young man, the stage was ready and the image changed to the competitors all getting in their respective positions. He was even more disappointed, however, when the match actually began. He thought someone challenging Belphegor must have had some power or strategy to be confident enough to try him. That didn't seem to be the case, as within the first 10 minutes Roygun was dominating the game. He stopped the broadcast and stood up. He couldn't watch that any longer. Might as well continue training, he murmured to himself. I am close. I can feel it. I can't work here though. He once again summoned a magic circle, but this time used it to teleport himself away. He reappeared in the same secluded field he had been using for the past couple of years. It was the perfect place to work on his more powerful techniques. Naruto closed his eyes and brought his right hand up, palm facing upwards, and took a few deep breaths. Here we go, he began channeling energy and felt the space around him begin shifting. If one were to be there with him, they'd see 4 beams of red light begin to spiral around his palm until they reached a single point above it. A small red orb formed and began glowing brightly. The blonde could feel himself starting to sweat and began to feel himself losing it. Oh shit! He yelled as the energy became unstable within the orb and dispersed with a small pop of energy. Unknown to him, it let off a little more power than he imagined. Damn, he grunted in frustration as he sat down. Still can't get that damn thing to work, he added as he stared at his palm, wondering what was going wrong. Not even a minute passed before he sensed someone behind him. He briefly panicked, hoping it wasn't anyone from the Bael clan. Upon turning around and seeing who it was, his mouth went dry. Standing not more than 5 feet away from him was the silver-haired beauty Grayfia. He watched as she scanned the environment quickly before her eyes locked onto him. Hello, she greeted. Even her voice was silky smooth. Are you the one who caused the explosion? She asked. Her face still showed no emotion, so he couldn't tell if she was upset. Explosion? Was she talking about his technique popping? He could only nod. I wasn't expecting a child to be the one to produce that much power. I am actually quite impressed. What's your name? Naruto Bael. Of course he didn't expect her to know who he is since the clan never spoke about him. He half expected her to tell him that she's never heard of him, but she didn't. How did you do it? Show me, she ordered softly. Naruto didn't really want to show anyone his abilities just yet, but he knew he couldn't refuse her order. She was stronger than him and could force him if need be. He sighed and went through the motions once more. The red orb once again manifested in his palm, and similar to last time, once it began glowing he lost it, letting off another burst of energy. He looked back at her after his failed attempt to see what her reaction would be. To his disappointment, she still had no readable expression. Interesting, she commented before turning and preparing a magic circle underneath her now that she found the source of the energy. Wait. Naruto called out to her before she could disappear. Yes? What is it? She asked as she turned back to look at him. Can you please not tell anyone that it was me that caused you to come here? I'd rather not have people know I can do this yet, he asked, giving her the most pleading look he could muster. The older woman stared at him for a second before the first flash of emotion passed through her face, amusement. She was actually amused at his distress. Perhaps. What's in it for me? He blinked. That wasn't one of the responses he was expecting. What?
You're asking me to keep this from my employer. I am sure this is something they'd like to be aware of. It seems important to you that this be kept a secret, so I'll ask again, what's in it for me? She asks. Though you couldn't see it anymore, he knew she was enjoying this.
Well, I don't have much now, but if you keep it to yourself, I'll buy you dinner one day. Anywhere you want, no matter how expensive. He really hoped she would go for it. If she didn't and the Bael clan found out about his power, he was sure they'd try and see what else he was hiding. He couldn't risk them finding out that he had an old evil piece set. To his surprise and delight, Grayfia smiled slightly. Very well, I'll hold you to that. Don't think I'll forget, she replied. Right before she disappeared, however, she spoke again. Also, perhaps try to continue to compress the energy a little more. Maybe it'll help you. With that, she disappeared. The blonde stared at the spot where she stood before looking back at his hand. Compress more, had try that tomorrow and hope it worked. Another 4 years quickly passed by, and in that time his power only continued to grow. Had made immense progress with most of the abilities he had. He even managed to complete 2 of the more complex techniques had been working on and started on another which in essence combined them. Grayfia's advice that day 4 years ago did wonders for him. Speaking of the beautiful woman, he hadn't seen her since the day she went to investigate the explosion had set off. Had held on to the hope that maybe he'd see her again soon, but it was not to be. It was to be expected though, considering her position. On the bright side, she did keep her word. The Bael clan still believed him to be powerless. It made his day-to-day life at home infuriating, but it worked out well for him. He was still overlooked and ignored for the most part. On occasion Lord Bael would see him and condescendingly ask how he's doing. It took every bit of willpower not to erase him from existence. All of that wouldn't matter anymore though, as he was completely ready to head out. Had originally planned on leaving the underworld 2 years ago, but reconsidered. While he may be strong, he knew that if he wanted the strongest members to be in his peerage, they would need an incredibly strong leader, so he postponed leaving until he felt he was at a level that could be taken more seriously by potential members.
Now that he had much better control over his abilities, he knew it was time. He took a look at his room for what would be the last time, checking to see if there was anything of importance to take with him. Apart from the clothes on his back, no, there wasn't. he summoned his magical circle, which had since changed to have a swirl pattern, and disappeared.
8 years later. Cool, well guys, I think it's just about time we call in that favor from Rias, don't you? The now 24-year-old Naruto asked the other two occupants of the room he was in. Will it take long? One of the two men replied, though by the sound of his voice one could tell he was young. I have a club orientation I need to attend. It should NT, Naruto replied. If it looks like it will, I'll have one of the others take you. What club did you join anyways? The boy hesitated before answering. The Body Improvement Club, he answered, hoping they wouldn't laugh. They didn't. Sounds good to me, the other man replied. I wonder how they'll react seeing me in the underworld. If we're lucky, maybe a battle will break out, he added with glee. Probably not, but we never know. Well then, let's go. The three disappeared via magic circle and reappeared a second later within the halls of what appeared to be a prestigious school. Luckily for them, though, no one was around at this time since classes had ended about an hour ago. I was kind of worried that someone would still be here. It'd be a pain having to wipe their memories, Naruto commented. He knocked twice on the door until a female voice told them to enter. The trio walked in and the blonde took a second to inspect the room as they approached the woman. It was a Victorian-themed room with a large desk near the wall, two small couches facing each other with a small coffee table separating them. Though that wasn't what drew the eyes of whoever visited. Why is there a shower in this room? The youngest of the three asked. When you're in charge of a portion of a city and your brother is one of the most important figureheads of the underworld, you can have almost anything you want, Naruto replied. Hello again, Naruto. All three men's attention went from glancing around the room to the person sitting behind the desk. She was a young woman of about 17. She wore the standard Kuo high school women's uniform, which consisted of a white long-sleeve shirt with a black ribbon on her shirt collar, along with a small black cape draped over her shoulders. One of her most distinct features, however, was her long crimson hair, the other being the size of her chest, which seemed like it gave the shirt trouble containing it. Her name was Rias Gremory, heiress of the Gremory clan and younger sister of Seer's ex Lucifer. She wasn't alone, however, as standing beside her was another young woman who wore the same uniform as Rias, though she had long black hair that was done in a ponytail being held in place by an orange ribbon. Unlike Rias, she had a teasing look on her face. He didn't know if that was a facade or if it was always like that. This is Rias' queen, Akino Hamejima. I am sorry, but I don't know your companions, she said, looking over at the two men besides him.
Rias, Akino, Naruto nods in acknowledgement. These two are a part of my peerage. He motioned to the younger one on his right-hand side. This is Shigeo Kageyama, but we all call him Mob. He's one of my pawns, he introduced. The boy looked like an ordinary middle schooler dressed in the typical black button-up and matching black pants. He had nothing that would make him stand out, as his face was blank as can possibly be. The young man bowed slightly to the two women in greeting. This here is one of my strongest members and one of my knights. Perhaps you've heard of him. Grimjow Jaegerjaquez, he said, motioning towards the much taller peerage member. The man was much taller and muscular than his fellow peerage member and looked much different as well. He had blue hair and blue eyes, and wore a black shirt with most of the chest open, revealing a red scar, all underneath an open white jacket with the sleeves rolled up to just below his elbows. Two white belts were fitted at his waist, one keeping his pants up, the other holding his katana on his left side. The most noticeable thing, though, was the bone-like fragment sitting on the right side of his jaw and green markings below his eyes. The two young women looked at the man before shaking their heads negative. Sorry, but no. Inwardly, Naruto shook his head in disbelief. They really didn't keep up with what goes on in the world. Anyways, I am surprised to see you here today. Did you need something? She asked, breaking him from his thoughts. Yes, actually. I'd like to call in that favor from the other day, he explained casually as the three took a seat. Rias nodded and sat up a bit straighter in her seat. Very well. I am a woman of my word. What would you like? She asked curiously. I need an audience with your older brother within the next 2 hours. By the look on her face, it was clearly not one of the things she imagined he'd ask for. While I am grateful that you helped me secure a powerful member into my peerage, I don't think that warrants an audience with one of the Satans. He's a very busy man. Isn't there anything else you'd like? Money, perhaps? She asks, hoping something would catch his attention. Naruto leaned back into the couch, a pensive look on his face. He rubbed his chin in thought and snapped his fingers when he got an idea. How about a wager? The redhead looked intrigued and motioned him to continue. How about you and your peerage take on Mob? If you win, I'll give you one of my peerage members, but if I win, you call your brother and let me talk to him. I'll arrange everything myself, he offered, knowing damn well they wouldn't beat him. The two women glanced at each other before looking at Mob at the same time. You can tell your brother I have news concerning the infinite dragon god. I am sure he'll be interested in meeting with me, he said. Gaining their attention briefly, they went back to staring at the young boy who stared back with a blank look on his face. The king and queen duo smiled at the same time and nodded. Very well, we can do this out back. I'll summon the rest of my peerage and we can do this. The blonde nodded and motioned for the two men to follow him out. Once we're done here you can go back and get ready for your club meeting. Mob smiled and nodded, eager to start improving himself. Within 5 minutes the rest of Rias' peerage was assembled and stood before them. There was a young brown-haired boy who wore the male version of the school uniform. Though he didn't attend the school, Naruto was sure that having a red shirt underneath the school blazer had to be against the dress code. The boy finished the look with matching black pants and shoes. Next to him was another young man, though this one was a blonde who had a more confident look on his face. He too wore the boy's uniform, though he actually wore it properly. A white short-sleeve button-up and black pants and black shoes. If the swords being conjured around him were any indication, he'd say this was her night. Finally, the shortest member of her peerage by far was a young-looking girl with white hair styled in such a fashion that it looked like she had cat ears. Her yellow eyes also gave a cat-like impression. Other than not filling out her uniform like the other two women, she wore exactly the same thing as them. Allow me to introduce you to my peerage, Rias began. You've met Issei. She motioned to the brown-haired boy. Yudo Kiba, my knight, Kaneko Tuho my rook. A pleasure, Naruto greeted. Now if you don't mind, could we get started? Mob here has a club meeting to attend at his school and I'd hate to be the reason he's late. Rias nodded and stood in front of her peerage while Naruto and Grimmjow stepped back a few feet. You think they'll make the kid try? Grimmjow asked in a bored tone as he stuffed his hands into his pockets. He observed every member of her peerage and not one managed to impress him.
Naruto smiled as Mob looked back to give them a thumbs up. Not even a little bit. Everyone ready? Begin.
The first to attack was Issei, which, considering had only been a devil for a few days, impressed him slightly, but that confidence to attack was the only thing that impressed him. No doubt he attacked because he didn't see Mob as too big a threat considering his small stature, a reasonable, if not incorrect assumption. Though Mob didn't have an imposing figure, he was by no means weak. He has powerful telekinetic powers, which were actually one of the reasons he ended up joining his peerage. The poor boy lost control one day when in an emotional state and his body couldn't handle the pushback. Naruto offered the boy a second chance to live in exchange for his help and the boy agreed. Mob tilted his head aside as Issei threw a sloppy punch and placed his hand on his back. When the boy's momentum kept him moving forward, Mob's hand glowed for a split second before Issei was violently tossed through the air hard enough to knock over a tree and slam into another one. Everyone looked over to see that the poor boy wasn't getting back up. The brief movement of his chest told them he was alive, so they continued.
There's one down, Naruto commented. Kiba was the next to attack. The difference in speed was on clear display as he dashed towards Mob much faster than Issei and slashed horizontally. The black-haired boy ducked and raised his arm towards Issei before swiping at the air.
Issei once again soared through the air but was caught by Kiba, who had to stop his second slash to make sure his friend wasn't hurt even more. In his distracted state, Kiba didn't notice his tie begin to glow and wrap around his neck and start to squeeze. Without even turning his head, he raised his hand and caught a punch from the woman's rook.
Luckily, he now had devil strength reinforcing his body as the blow was strong enough to crack the ground beneath him. It's almost sad to watch, isn't it? Grimmjow asked rhetorically. A middle schooler is making quick work of them. You'd think someone related to a Satan would have stronger members with them.
Naruto nodded as he watched Mob continue to simply catch the young girl's attacks while continually choking Kiba. It's to be expected, really. He chuckled watching the three get tossed aside. She's focused on getting out of an arranged marriage from what Saraorg told me. The blue-haired man scoffed. She's gonna end up paying for that in the future for not focusing on training them.
Yeah, but it's not our problem. They noticed Mob pull his phone out of his pocket and his eyes widened. It's over. Sure enough, even as Akino and Rias tried blitzing him with lightning and the power of destruction, it was a futile effort. As with the bare minimal effort, he held his hand out and blasted them away. Kid didn't even move from where he started. Grimmjow muttered to himself in disappointment at what had just witnessed. Naruto shook his head as well. Do me a favor and take Mob to his club and then meet up at the house. Gather everyone. The man nodded but grumbled something inaudible while Naruto walked over to the downed redhead. You alright there? Man, you guys got roughed up, he teased.
We got beat by a middle schooler, she said in embarrassment. Was he trying at all? She asked, hoping to get some of her dignity back. Oh no, not at all. Oi Mob. Before you go, what percentage were you on? Naruto questioned. About 3%, the boy replied before disappearing with Grimjow.
Naruto looked back at the now mortified woman. Yeah, that's pretty sad. Anyway, mind getting in touch with Lucifer? Rias huffed. Fine. She brought her hand up and summoned a small red magical circle that she then put up to her ear. She didn't speak for well over a minute and he began to think maybe he'd have to find another way to get the Mon's attention. Luckily he didn't have to dwell on it for long as the woman began speaking. Please stop. You're so embarrassing, she complained into the circle. No, I have someone here who says they need to speak with you about Ophis. Naruto looked on as she became silent and asked if he was still there. She held her hand out and the circle began to glow before a voice came through.
Can you hear me? The voice of a man rang out. We can.
Great. However, you happen to have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know to whom I am speaking with. Naruto Biel. Though I've since abandoned that name and go by Uzumaki these days, he answered, ignoring Ria's shocked look at the mention of his name.
A pleasure. Now I was told you had information regarding Ophis. That's correct. Though would it be possible to have this conversation in person? The information is quite sensitive and there is another matter entirely I'd like to discuss with you.
I should have an opening in about 2 hours or so. If that works for you, I can arrange my Queen Grayfia to pick you up from the academy. What luck that in 2 hours I'd have an opening. That's perfect. Though would you mind if I brought my peerage along? It should NT be a problem. Well then, I'll see you here. The circle disappeared from Ria's hand and he stood up from his crouched position. He looked to see everyone finally regaining their bearing and beginning to stand up. Well, it looks like you guys are all right. I'll see you around. Giving them a small wave, he summoned his own magical circle beneath him and disappeared. He reappeared in the center of a giant living room of the compound had purchased here in Kuo. It was a giant 3-story mansion that easily housed all of his peerage members, plus there were still other buildings around that were used for training, storage, and anything else they might need. Speaking of peerage members, didn't I tell him to gather them? Naruto said to himself, slightly annoyed that they weren't here. Oi! Everyone down here now.
Within seconds all of his pieces were in attendance. Everyone was either taking a seat on one of the many couches around the TV or standing in the case of Grimjow.
He wanted to smile in glee. It was finally time for him and his peerage to make their underworld debut. He was excited to see how they would react to certain members. They would for sure throw a fit. He glanced at everyone, making sure he had their complete attention. First was his knight Grimjow Jaegerjaquez, labeled a triple S-class criminal by the yokai faction and was one of the most powerful yokai born in recent years. Next was his second knight and one of his more calm and collected members who was currently sitting down drinking a cup of tea.
His attire consists of a wide-brimmed black hat decorated with a large plume, and a long, open black coat with no shirt underneath, with red, flower-patterned sleeves and collar. He has a small golden cross necklace that hides a small dagger. He has light purple pants tucked into a pair of black boots. The most eye-catching thing about him, however, was the giant black blade that rests on his back, though at the moment it was leaning against the couch. He was a wandering swordsman looking for a good challenge. The humans he faced didn't last a minute against him and the few supernatural swordsmen he fought didn't do much better. He originally declined the invitation to join, but after being told of master-class swordsmen that the stronger devils had in their peerage, he agreed. He hoped to find a challenge and trusted Naruto would get him one. His name is Dracul Mahawk. Next up was one of his shorter, more cheerful members. A young magician blessed with great magical power. The downside was that she could only cast one technique.
That being an explosion. Because of that she was deemed useless by her peers and was excommunicated from the magician faction.
She set out to get stronger and prove them wrong. She had the look of a cartoon witch. She wears a black cloak with a gold border, a black choker, and a red long-sleeve dress that stopped just below the waist. One leg was bandaged and the other had a black high sock. She had her own notable trait, that being the eye patch covering her left eye. She claimed it sealed her power, but everyone knew she thought it just looked cool. Her name is Megaman, his bishop.
The next woman was his second bishop. Unlike her younger counterpart, she was taller and older. She wore very revealing clothing for which she was often berated by another member of the peerage. She wore a pair of thigh-high purple socks along with a pair of matching purple panties. She had a small purple vest that covered her breasts and had light fur at the neck as well as purple gloves. She had short black hair and gold eyes along with a mysterious aura about her. Like him, her ability was also called Infinity, though it worked in a different sense. Her spells could last forever after being cast. She accepted his offer of joining as she saw him as a rare individual due to his abilities and the mystery surrounding them. Her name was Merlin, one of the strongest mages alive. Next was his first rook, a rowdy and short-tempered woman who was always looking for the next fight. She had overwhelming fire magic that could put even a volcano to shame, which has only been further enhanced with her devil piece. She usually liked to form her attacks into the shape of feline animals such as lions, panthers and cheetahs, and was even able to completely engulf herself in fire to increase her physical abilities. She was an average-sized woman with blue eyes and long, wavy vermilion-colored hair. Her most interesting features were red markings accenting her eyes and one sharp canine tooth sticking out her lip. She wore a white tunic, covered by a long dark blue shirt with her keeping the sleeves long with a high collar. She wore a purple sash around her waist with white trousers, with her wearing a long red cape. Her name was Meroleona Vermilion, a ferocious and dangerous fire mage. Next up was his second rook, an extremely dangerous human turned devil. He used to be a mercenary for hire and one of the best blacksmiths in the world. Enough where he was able to imbue a 6-foot-long greatsword with magic where it was able to kill angels, fallen angels, yokai and devils. He joined because he was betrayed by his best friend who proceeded to rape then kill his girlfriend while he watched then tore out his eye and cut off one of his arms as a reminder. The man was 65, easily being one of the tallest members there, while he had short spiky black hair resembling a crew cut with a few bangs hanging down. With a small tuft of white hair on his head, he was easily one of the most scarred people there, also with him missing one eye which stayed forever closed with a scar across his nose and having a mechanical arm in place of his flesh one. He was covered from neck down in midnight scaled armor while he sat in a love chair sharpening his massive blade. This was Guts, considered one of the strongest humans in history before turning into a devil and known for his legendary Dragon Slayer sword and berserker armor that gave him the appearance of a demonic dog, wolf. Finally there were his pawns. Though they were pawns, they were anything but disposable. First was a tall man in a white military-style suit with a double-breasted jacket on. He had 2 red armbands with a skull on them on each band. He had small bolts in his ears as earrings as well as a red mohawk. He was a member of a human faction, named Quincy's, who had the ability to use the spirit energy in the air and convert it into weapons and in his case create devastating fire attacks. His name was Bazard Black, aka Baz B. Next up was a young man of about 17 with two-tone black and pink hair. He was actually killed by his own sacred gear that housed a demon inside of it. Upon reviving him, the demon made a pact with him. Once he regains his strength, they'll battle it out. If he wins, he removes the evil piece. If he loses, he allows free use of his power to its host, Itadori Yuji.
The next was a young martial artist with a terrible fashion sense. He wore a green bodysuit with orange weights at the legs. He had a bowl cut and large eyebrows. As a failed magician due to the lack of actual magic, he was ridiculed and belittled. He joined after seeing that both he and Naruto were both looked down upon for things out of their control.
Next up was a young-looking woman with long gray hair and a black bodysuit that stopped just above her knees. She was a human hitman who was hired to kill Naruto after had cleaned out a casino in Vegas. She was the only member who, because she targeted him, was offered to join him after being beaten down or die. Having given her a good thrashing, she agreed, saying that she'd get him back eventually. After her was a blonde tan-skinned woman. She wore a short white jacket zipped up that covered the bottom portion of her face and barely managed to cover her breasts. It also showed her stomach area. She had short blonde hair that also had 3 small braids. She was a former high-ranking officer of the yokai faction who left after the higher-ups sent her 3 best friends on a suicide mission. Her name, Tyr Harabel.
The next one was an older blonde woman, though her appearance didn't show it. She wore a green robe over a sleeveless white shirt held together by a sash. She had a small diamond symbol in the center of her forehead that actually radiated power. She was the peerage's doctor as well as self-proclaimed mother, as she was always the one berating members when they acted out of line. Next was another blonde-haired woman, though considerably shorter than the last. She wore a pink and white dress and had her hair styled into 2 pigtails. She joined on the promise of being able to collect rare stones that weren't found on Earth. In exchange, she'd lend the group her immense power. Her name is Biscuit Kruger, aka Bisky. Finally there was his queen. She has very long white hair and possessed white clear eyes. Her eyebrows were cut very short and round, a symbol of nobility, and she wore a red shade of lipstick on her lips. She wore a white kimono with tomo symbols running down the middle. The most noticeable trait she possessed was the horns that sat atop her head, the former right hand of God alongside Michael, who disappeared from heaven soon after his death. Her name, Kagaya Utsutsuki. So what is it? Baz B asked as he munched on some chips. We're heading to the underworld in 2 hours. Naruto stated simply. It's time to finally start moving. The girl was that easy to convince. Bisky asked as she patted her dress down to remove chip crumbs while glaring at Baz. Naruto shook his head. She refused at first, but we came to an agreement. Mob beat her in her peerage and she agreed to call Searzex. I then secured a meeting between us. Clear your schedules and be ready to depart. Tsunade glanced around the room. What about Mob? He's not here, she asked, not knowing he had after-school activities. He has some things to take care of at school, so he won't be joining us. Everyone nodded and went back to whatever it is they were doing before being called. Likewise, he headed upstairs to his room to change clothing. 2 hours later, everyone was ready to go. Rather than his super casual clothes, he now wore a black shirt underneath a black jacket that had fur along the neck along with red crisscross patterns down the front. He had matching black pants along with black shoes with a light red check mark looking logo along the sides. They were all gathered inside the club room and were waiting for their pickup. They didn't have to wait too long as a red magical circle materialized a few feet away from them. Naruto noticed Grayfia did not look a day older than the last time had seen her. If everyone is ready, we can leave at once, she said, looking at Naruto. He nodded and watched as the red circle grew in size until it could accommodate everyone. In a split second their surroundings changed. Everyone glanced around the new area to see lavish-looking artwork along the walls depicting different scenes in history. Giant stone pillars that made the place look even more extravagant were all over the place as well. This way please, the silver-haired woman called out as she began leading them. Following behind her, the young blonde couldn't help but trail his eyes from the top of her head down to her backside. As he stared for a few seconds, he couldn't help but feel eyes on him from either side of him. Sure enough, Grimjow and Bazby had made their way next to him and were both looking at him. None of the men spoke, but all three grinned at the same time. They had to wipe those off their faces though as they reached a large door and Grayfia turned around. The Satans are expecting you. Please enter, she said as she opened the door for them. The blonde walked forward but stopped just as he was about to pass her. Mind if I have a word with you for a minute after the meeting? After she nodded in agreement, he headed inside, his peerage following behind him. Upon entering, he saw all four of the current Satans sitting around a large conference table with one empty seat available. Whether that was always there or it was put in for this meeting, he wasn't sure. Seeing everyone come in, all four stood up. A small gesture they didn't have to do considering their status in the underworld, but it was appreciated. First was the current Lucifer, Searsex, who looked like an older male version of his sister. Ajuka Beelzebub, the green-haired genius and creator of the evil piece set. Seraphal Leviathan, former heiress of the Seatree clan and wielder of powerful ice magic. Finally Falbium Asmodeus, former member of the Glacia Labelas clan. Mr. Uzumaki, welcome, Searsex greeted. I have to say, when you said you were bringing your peerage, I didn't expect a notorious criminal, and higher up from heaven, he added, looking at Grimjow and Kagaya. No one does, but they are not all bad. You have my word they won't do any harm or cause any problems, Naruto placated. The Satans all looked to the blue-haired man, who stared back without flinching. He looked uninterested on the outside, but on the inside he really hoped he could get a fight with one of the four strongest in the underworld. They nodded and sat down. I am glad. Please have a seat. Now, I don't wish to sound rude. We do have a few other meetings to get to today, so if you don't mind, we'd like to start. Naruto smiled and sat down. Straight to the point. I like it. I'll be honest, it's not the main thing I wanted to discuss, but we'll start with Ophis, he said, leaving them slightly curious as to what could be more important to him. I have it on good authority that Ophis has created a group to try and kick Great Red out of the dimensional gap. They go by the Chaos Brigade. The group consists of devils, fallen angels, yokai, magicians, you name it, they are probably already a part of it. A lot of them have powerful sacred gears. The Satans could see why he brought this to their attention. A group like this banding together couldn't be up to anything good. The blonde continued, chances are most of these people have their own agendas. In fact, the one we interrogated was working for Creusary Asmodeus. That managed to really get their attention, so the old Satan faction is a part of the group as well, Ajuka began while rubbing his chin in thought. Seraphal nodded, an uncharacteristically serious look on her face. Chances are they'll begin targeting us in the near future. The blonde nodded at their words. Ophis most likely doesn't care what her members do as long as Red is out. I wouldn't be surprised if some devils from the underworld are already a part of the group, honestly. We can't rule that possibility out. We'll have to discuss this further until we can come up with a way to find out for sure, Searsex replied. I have a question for you if you wouldn't mind, Falbium said, speaking for the first time. At the blonde's nod he continued, what do you gain by bringing this to our attention? Don't get me wrong, I speak for all of us when I say we're grateful for the information, but what do you get out of this? Everyone turned back to see Naruto lean back slightly in his chair and smile. That's actually linked to what else I wanted to talk about. I'd like to establish a clan in the underworld. As I told you earlier, I've since disconnected myself with the Baal name. There's a condition that needs to be met to be recognized as an extra demon clan, as none can be added to the existing 72 pillars. Seraphal began explaining. That condition is that the clan in question needs to possess a devil ability unique to your clan. A condition I fulfill, the blonde replied. You've inherited the Baal clan's power of destruction. Ajuka asks. He shook his head negative. No, I have something else entirely, he replied while holding out his right hand in front of Sirzek's. Go on and touch my hand. The two super devils glanced at each other for a split second, a silent conversation passing between the two before the man did as he was requested. Everyone watched in fascination as the Satan's hand stopped a few inches away as an invisible barrier prevented him from making contact. The Uzumaki clan has control over infinity. Sirzek pulled his hand back and was going to respond but stopped as someone walked into the meeting room. As if personally invited, Lord Baal walked straight into the room. If the look on the four devils' faces were anything to go off of head say this had happened before, they all looked irritated but tried to hide it. Lord Baal, Sirzek said in a strong tone, we're currently in an important meeting. I understand, however, the man trailed off as his eyes landed on the blonde with them. What is this thief doing here? He asks, looking straight at Naruto. Excuse me, Naruto asks, playing stupid. This only seemed to enrage the man further, much to his enjoyment. Don't play coy with me, boy. You stole an evil piece set belonging to the clan before you ran away from the manor. He complained before looking back to the Satans. Sirzek, I demand this failure be taken in immediately. While he and Sirzek began to go back and forth, the latter doing everything in his power to remain calm, Naruto looked to Ajuka, who, as if he felt his gaze turn to look at him, making sure his hand was out of view of Lord Baal so only Ajuka could see, he summoned a small item into his hand. As expected, the green-haired monk's eyes widened ever so slightly until Naruto sealed it away again. Immediately the man coughed into his hand twice to get their attention. Lord Baal, I believe because this is a matter between two clan members, it would be in everyone's best interest to let the two of you sort it out amongst yourselves as long as no one else is involved.
Again he shared a look with his best friend, who'd turned to look at him questioningly after his declaration. The head of the Baal clan seemed shocked by the turn of events but eventually smiled as if an idea had just popped into his mind. Between us, you say? Very well, boy, come to the manor tonight. If you don't, you'll have more than just me to worry about. With his piece said, he turned around and left the room. I take it you two don't get along? Seraphal asked jokingly. The others shook their heads at the obvious statement. Well, begin the necessary steps to introduce a new clan and well, be in touch. I'll be honest, your ability has me intrigued, Sirzek said with Ajuka mirroring his opinion. The blonde stood up and nodded. Thank you for your time. As they began leaving, he made eye contact with the silver-haired woman, who nodded back to him. You guys head back. I'll see you in a little bit. The moment his peerage disappeared, he heard the door behind him open then close. You've grown. He turned to see Grayfia standing behind him, her hands clasped in front of her, both in body and power, she finished. Naruto turned to face her completely. Once I was strong enough to fend for myself, I was able to leave and train without the fear of being caught. Does that mean you were able to complete the technique I caught you practicing all those years ago? She asked curiously. Completely mastered it. But anyway, I wanted to thank you for keeping your word and not telling anyone about what you saw. I only said it was a kid practicing magic and it got out of control, it wasn't questioned. Regardless, you kept your word, and if I recall correctly, I promised to take you to dinner if you did. I'd like to make good on that, he offered, hoping she'd be willing. Like last time, he was sure he saw a flash of a smile appear before it was gone. Very well, I'll have some free time in about 2 hours. He wanted to cheer but managed to contain himself. Perfect. I can take care of the Baal fiasco after dinner. Also, where will we be going? He asked to make sure he dressed for the occasion. If I recall, it was wherever I wanted. You'll find out when we get there. Dress formally and meet me at the front door of this building, she said before bowing and heading back inside. Once she was gone, he left the building to make sure he knew where he was so he could teleport himself back when the time came. The rest of the day passed by in a blur for him. After heading back home, he showered, making sure he didn't miss a spot, and was currently standing in front of a mirror fixing himself up. His 12-year-old self would never believe that he'd actually get a date with the women, but here he was. He was now in an all-black suit with a white button-up shirt being the only non-black item. After letting Tsunade make sure everything looked okay and he smelled good, he was off. The young man almost lost the ability to speak when she appeared just seconds after him. Rather than the maid uniform he had seen her in, she now wore a tight white dress that ended just above her knees, along with a pair of black heels that added a couple inches to her height. The dress did a damn good job highlighting her curves, he thought. He also couldn't help but notice it showed a nice bit of cleavage. Wow, you look beautiful, he complimented. Thank you, you clean up well yourself. Come now, she told him as she took him by the arm and teleported them to where they would be eating. The two arrived at a grandiose-looking restaurant where upon entering, the waiter's eyes lit up in shock. He was clearly not expecting someone like her to show up. The man immediately came up to them and took them to where they'd be seated and told them he'd be back shortly. The two settled in and skimmed the menu looking for something good. Naruto noticed a lot of the items were on the expensive side. Luckily had taken money from any and all stray devils had come across in his time away. The two made small talk going over what they'd been up to in recent years. Naruto explained where had been, how he recruited some of his members, and a little insight on his abilities. Likewise, Grayfia also answered most of the questions he had regarding her job and what life was like being in the peerage of a Satan. He was glad that she let the emotionless facade she put up drop while here. She was attentive, listening to him as he spoke and asking questions when she was intrigued about something. She even outright laughed when she found something funny. Her laugh was music to his ears. Even after they finished their food, the two remained sitting, simply enjoying each other's company. Naruto had been slightly worried that she'd be blank-faced the entire time and leave after eating, but thankfully that wasn't the case. This place was amazing, the blonde commented, patting his stomach. You have good taste. It's a favorite of mine, she replied as she wiped her mouth with one of the napkins. Then would you be open to letting me take you out again sometime? He asked, throwing caution to the wind. If he didn't try now, he might not get another chance soon. She smiled. While I would enjoy that, unfortunately my position doesn't leave me much time for a romantic relationship. As queen of the current Lucifer as well as the maid, I deal with many important people in the underworld as well as set up meetings. Today was a rare exception. Naruto tapped his chin in thought. So you're saying if you weren't in that position you'd be open to trying something? I would, she admitted. I haven't been out to enjoy myself in years and this was very enjoyable. I would love to go out again but my job doesn't allow me the time, she said, hoping he wouldn't be too down about it. So all I have to do is have Sears release you from both of your positions, he said as if it was the simplest thing in the world. She laughed softly at his nonchalant attitude. It won't be that simple. Apart from helping the Satans with their day-to-day duties, I am a powerful part of Sears' peerage. He won't be willing to let me go so easily.
What if he didn't have a choice? He said, raising a finger in the air. Explain, she ordered, now curious to see what he had in mind. She'd expected him to be let down and maybe even a little sad, but this wasn't what she expected. What if he lost a wager in front of everyone and he then had no choice? The woman blinked before realization hit her. A rating game. He nodded. If I challenge him for you and he agrees, he'd have no choice after losing. That's a large task. Why go so far for me after only one date? She questioned. While she knew a lot of men found her beautiful, she didn't know how many of them would be willing to go so far as to think about challenging Sears Lucifer just for her. To put it simply, I like you. Not just because you're unbelievably beautiful, but because in the last hour or so I found that you're funny, interesting, and not to mention I know you're powerful. I'd like to see where this could go, he admitted. I am flattered, she said softly. However, challenging Sears won't be that easy. As it stands, only the current first rank of the rating games has the privilege to challenge a Satan to a match. Currently it's Dhauser Belial and he seems to have no interest in doing so, she informed him. Naruto sat back in his chair and narrowed his eyes slightly at the information. So I need to take down Dhauser before I can reach Sears. Sounds doable. If that's what it takes, then so be it, he said, flashing her a winning smile, one that she reciprocated. Very well. If you believe you can pull it off, I'll be waiting for you. The two left soon after their conversation and headed back to their respective homes. Though he wished he could simply lay down and relax after a great date, he had one more stop to make. He headed back to his peerage to round them up and change back into his clothing he wore when meeting the Satans and teleported to the Bale clan manor. Nostalgic. Merlin asked with a teasing smile. Nah. I hated this place. He moved forward and walked in, similar to how Lord Bale entered the meeting room earlier in the day. To his immense luck, most of the maids that treated him relatively well when he was younger were present. If the looks on their faces were anything to go by, they at least recognized him. Excuse me, where can I find the head of the clan? He should be expecting us. One of the maids he didn't recognize stepped forward and led them to where the man was. They arrived at a brown door and were told to head inside. Without so much as another glance, the woman left. Everyone stepped inside and saw the man sitting behind a large black desk, a stack of papers sitting atop it. Unlike the Satans who were courteous enough to stand, he didn't. Before even being told to sit down, the blonde grabbed the chair in front of him and dropped down onto it before crossing his legs. I would say it's nice to see you, but that would be a lie, he said, which seemed to annoy the man.
Look, boy. Beelzebub is having us settle this among ourselves. So I've come up with something that can clear this whole thing up. The man paused to take in their reactions.
Well, spit it out, Bazby barked at him, already annoyed by the dramatics of the man. Had already made an ass of himself earlier, this was just making him look worse. The man narrowed his eyes at the mohawk-having man but turned his attention back to the blonde. Seeing as you stole our evil piece set, why not put them to use? Well, have a rating game in a week's time between you and a champion of my choice to represent me. Should you lose, you'll have your pieces stripped and you lot will be executed, he told them, not bothering to hide his malicious smile. Who's the champion? As he finished asking, a green clan symbol appeared on the ground next to Lord Bale, revealing a blond man who seemed to be in his 30s. He wore standard nobleman's attire and looked at them with a look of contempt. Just on time. Let me introduce you to the man ranked third in the rating games. Bettas Abaddon. The man in question continued to look at them like they were less than filth, kind of like how the Bale clan looked at him most of the time. Listen here, brats. The rating games are a noble's form of entertainment for the upper class. Low-class reincarnated devils who don't have talent, wealth, or status have no business involving themselves in the games. Be honored you'll be sharing the arena with me, even if it's only to embarrass yourselves, he spat. While the man was droning on, Naruto had tuned him out, instead replaying the words Grayfia had told him earlier today. Only the current first rank could challenge a Satan to a match. If I am risking execution, then I have my own stipulation. Unless you're afraid your man will lose. That seemed to piss Abaddon off, seeing as he took a step forward. Luckily he was stopped by Lord Bale as Grimjow had already reached for his blade. The man nodded for him to continue. If I win, no matter in what way, I become the new third rank. The man didn't hesitate to agree. Seeing that they had come to an agreement, he stood in motion for everyone to follow.
As they left the office, the ever-quiet Mihawk spoke. What an insufferable man.
Being in the same room as him had me itching for Dragonslayer. Guts grunted out, glad to be away from the arrogant devil before he did something drastic. I know what you mean. It was getting hard to block out my sacred gear's voice in my head telling me to kill him, Itadori added. I was this close to blasting a hole through the fucker's head, Baz commented as he held his thumb and index finger together to show how close he was. So how are we going to handle him? Harabel asked as they reappeared in their home. The smile Naruto let appear on his face was just as malevolent as the one Lord Bale had shot at them. You guys are going to thoroughly humiliate his peerage while I handle him. The rating game automatically removes you when you're no longer lit to compete. I am going to kill him before it can remove him from the arena. That's why you said no matter what way you win, Itadori commented. It all made sense now. A nod was his answer. At this everyone smirked. This was gonna be good. The following day, the soon-to-be clan head found himself walking down the streets of Kuo back to the house. In his hands were 4 large bags full of different assortments of gluttons that were his peerage members. Family had made quick work of the food after their meeting with Lord Bale. They were all looking forward to the game, waiting to get back at him for the way he spoke to them. Similarly for him, the Mont's words echoed in his head all night and had hardly gotten any sleep. Not because of what he said, mind you, it was more so him going over the best way he could kill that asshole. He had plenty of techniques that could get the job done, but he needed something that would really get people talking, something that left no room for debate whether or not he truly deserved the title as the third best. 2 ideas popped into the forefront of his mind, but he was unsure as to which was the better choice. He also didn't want to show off too much. After all, he still needed to deal with whoever was in second place as well as Dehauser before Searsex. If he showed all of his cards in this debut match, then he would be left with no surprises for the big leagues. He also made a mental note to do a little more research into Dehauser. While he was confident in his abilities, someone like Dehauser Belial should not be taken lightly. He strolled on his path for a little while longer before he came to a sudden halt. He then casually glanced to his left. Any normal person would see nothing but trees, but he wasn't normal. He could sense 4 tainted energy signatures radiating from the within. He had sensed the 4 tainted energies that had been tailing him ever since he came out of the grocery store. As he extended his senses, he found that one of them was familiar. It was the fallen angel woman from the night they killed Issei. The blonde sighed. Looks like she didn't learn anything from our last encounter. Oh well, might as well deal with this now, he said quietly to himself as he made his way into the trees. After about 5 minutes of walking, he turned around and placed the bags down. You've been following me for a while now, might as well come out, he called out. For a few seconds the only sounds he heard were the soft rustlings of the leaves being moved by the wind until he heard four thumps behind him. His suspicions were confirmed a second later when he turned around and came face to face with four fallen angels. The first one, sure enough, was the one named Rainier from the other night. Alongside her were two other women and a single man. The man wore a white dress shirt under a gray trench coat and had matching black pants and shoes. The eye-catching detail was that he was also wearing both a fedora and an ascot. He stared at him with a calculating look as if appraising him, and by the expression on his face, one could tell that he didn't look impressed. Next was a younger woman who could pass off as a child. Her attire didn't help her look any older either, as she wore a black and white gothic Lolita dress with frills, a black bow top sitting on her blonde hair, and black shoes with thigh-high white socks. Like the man, she too was staring at him, though she had an arrogant smirk on her face, one that he'd be sure to wipe off very quickly. Finally, the last of her crew was arguably the most mature-looking of them all. She had navy blue hair that partially covered her right eye. She wore a maroon-colored suit consisting of a short skirt that stopped well above the knees and a blazer-like top with a wide collar. Her shirt was also unbuttoned enough that it displayed her cleavage. Whether that was to distract her opponents or not, he wasn't sure. However, unlike the other three who seemed to believe they were safe, she wore a different expression. The moment his eyes met hers, he knew she was aware that he was out of their league. Her eyes widened slightly, a far cry from the neutral expression she wore seconds ago. It seemed at least one of them had some sense. Maybe there was hope for her yet. Well, he acts, seeing as they hadn't moved, I'd really like to go home, so let's hurry this up. I am surprised you're back though, considering I beat you last time, he commented to Rainier, who sneered at him in return. I was caught off guard. I wasn't expecting another devil there that night. Things are different this time. We outnumber you. 4-1, she trailed off, motioning to her fellow fallen angels. Naruto smirked in confidence as he looked at the fallen getting ready to attack. 3 out of the 4 were none the wiser about their impending doom, with the one in the suit being the only one to take a step back. The man with the fedora stepped forward and created a light spear in one hand. I must say, you're pretty calm for a man that's about to die. Of course I am calm. After all, you're weak, he declared with a smile on his face. That seemed to hit a nerve as the three finally decided to attack. A total of 5 light spears quickly made their way to him in blinding speeds. Rainier and her male colleague had decided to throw 2 each, while the younger one only threw 1. Well, blinding speeds to a normal person are low-level devil. Naruto, however, kept his hands tucked in his pockets as the spears got closer and closer, making no effort to defend himself. The looks on their faces were priceless as they watched their spears suddenly stop a foot short of him. Is that all you guys got? Naruto asks. Sigh, I knew you were weak, but I thought you had a little more in you. Pathetic. Predictably, this served to piss them off. Unfortunately for them, he was getting tired of this. Faster than he could react, he appeared in front of the fedora-wearing man, and in a split second it was over for him. The 3 women watched in horror as their comrade was pushed back, all 4 limbs distorting slightly before detaching from his body, manifesting a tiny red orb the size of a marble. He flicked it towards the groaning man and eradicated his body. Before they could comprehend what was happening, he dashed towards the smallest member of their group and kicked her in the gut. The sheer force of his kick sent her flying backwards, embedding her body into a tree. Mittelt. Rainier yelled. Damn you. She summoned multiple light spears and began throwing them in his direction. What makes you think these spears will have any more impact than the last? Naruto asks as the spears simply stopped before they reached him. Not deterred, she flew into the air and proceeded to throw more from different directions, seemingly hoping to find a blind spot. Calawarner, what the fuck are you doing? Help me kill this bastard, she ordered. Unfortunately for Rainier, Calawarner was still petrified in her spot, not having moved since the battle began. As Rainier tried charging up a bigger spear, she found her vision cut off as Naruto teleported next to her and gripped her by the face before plunging back down. The impact was hard enough to leave a small crater in the earth. The last thing the woman saw was a bright red light before she was erased from existence. With the 3 fallen angels dead, the blonde turned his attention back to Calawarner. You seem to know from the beginning that things would go badly. Too bad your friends didn't, he said, glancing at the blonde girl who was slumped over the tree. They are my coworkers, not my friends. Still, I wanted to save them. I understood that this was going to end badly, but knowing them, it's futile. They wouldn't have listened anyway, she replied, finally finding her voice. He nodded. Yeah, it definitely turned out bad for them. The question now is, what do I do with you? He said out loud and rubbed his chin before looking up. Ah, but it seems we are not alone anymore. Looks like we have a guest. Calawarner frowned in confusion, wondering what he was talking about. That confusion quickly turned into shock and then fear when another figure landed between them. The man was relatively tall and had black hair with gold bangs and a black goatee. Like the fallen angel standing before him, he wore a long maroon jacket being kept closed by two black belts around his waist and gray slacks along with black shoes. Azazel-sama, she uttered nervously. Naruto looked over the new arrival and whistled. The Governor General of the Fallen Angels, what brings you here? You avenging your fallen soldiers? He questioned. Azazel glanced at him and smirked. The small amount of hope Calawarner had was instantly shattered. If they hadn't gone against my orders, perhaps it would have been a different story. Oh, well, I was in the area when I sensed my wayward soldiers' energy fluctuating. I got curious who they were fighting against, as I specifically said they were only to study their target. To my surprise, I find none other than Naruto Uzumaki, he answered with a smile on his face as if he was pleased. The blonde was slightly surprised that the man knew him. I am honored that a big shot like you knows of me, but I don't think I made myself that big a deal for the faction leaders to even know of me, yet, so how? He was more curious than anything. He was sure neither the Satans nor the Bale clan had gotten his name out. I have my ways, he said proudly. I even heard about your upcoming raiding game against Betas Abaddon, he revealed. Damn, that was just yesterday and the man knew about it already. Color him impressed. Truth be told, I am looking forward to it. Ought to be interesting, want it? The man continued as he smirked at the blonde. You won't be disappointed, I am sure. Naruto commented before he turned his attention back to the blue-haired woman. I suppose you would want to deal with her yourself, considering she's part of your faction and all. The woman turned to her leader with hopeful eyes, a long shot from the proud look she was used to wearing. No, I'll leave it to you. After all, they did attack you and followed Kokobeel's orders instead of mine. Consider this as a token of my goodwill. Naruto nodded. Since you didn't attack me like your colleagues did, I'll give you a choice. You can work for me and my family, or you can join your friends. As he gave her the ultimatum, he brought his hand up and let a black ball of energy materialize on his palm. Calawarner turned to Azazel once more. Realizing she wouldn't be saved, she made her choice.
She hung her head down and her shoulders shrugged. I'll work for you, just don't kill me. Well, I suppose our business here is done, said Naruto as picked up his grocery bags. He then looked at Azazel and asked. But I suppose that token of goodwill doesn't come out for free, does it? Azazel laughed and said, ha 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 ha, perceptive one, aren't you? That's true. Naruto narrowed his eyes and asked, well then, shoot. I don't like to owe anything to anybody. I'll do it as long as it's not dirty.
Trust me, it's not. I just want to ask a few questions, that's all. We can even go fishing during this talk, said Azazel, adding an incentive to his offer. Naruto thought for a moment before coming to a decision. Well, it wouldn't hurt to be on good terms with the leader of the Fallen. Might even come handy someday, he thought. Alright, let me just drop this off at my place and run an errand really quick and we'll go fishing. The lake just south of here. 30 minutes. The man nodded and extended all 12 of his wings before taking flight once more. Turning to the lone fallen angel, he spoke. Come on, let's go. We need to drop the food off. Half hour later. And that's how we got to where we are now. Naruto had just relayed what had transpired the previous day and given him some background on the situation. He didn't really care if the man knew or not, as there was no info that could be used against him in any way. Azazel nodded as he took a sip of his drink that had brought along with him. He, Calawarner, who'd been brought along by Naruto for reasons unknown to her, and the blonde himself were sitting in a relatively large boat in the center of the lake, going over what Azazel wanted to know, and choosing a champion who's in the top 5 guarantees him victory. At least that's what he's banking on, he said, studying the younger man's face. He didn't look the slightest bit worried. Naruto reeled the line back, revealing a rather small fish on the hook, and nodded after tossing it back into the water. That's right, but I am confident I can beat him. The goal is to thoroughly humiliate him while showing off as little as possible and still make it clear I deserve that spot. I see. Your confidence suggests that you either have a solid plan or an impeccable power, a sacred gear, perhaps. He asks, the last bit sounding hopeful, something that didn't go unnoticed by the young devil.
The blonde chuckled. Sorry to burst your bubble, but I don't have a sacred gear. Then what is it? He asked curiously. Naruto smirked and began reeling when he felt a pull on the line. Azazel, seeing this, whined almost childishly, come on man, give me something to work with. This only made Naruto laugh a little harder as he found the man's antics amusing. He then looked at Azazel and ordered, scoop some water and throw it at me.
Azazel was curious at the sudden order and glanced at his former subordinate looking for some clue. However, to his disappointment, Calawarner was equally curious to see what the blonde devil had in mind. Azazel did not think any longer, and did as he was told. He scooped a handful of water and threw it at the blonde. The two fallen angels watched in both fascination, surprise, and curiosity when the water hit a barrier of sorts. Calawarner's face lit up in realization as she immediately knew this was what was causing the light spears that her now dead colleagues were throwing to stop right before him. Azazel meanwhile tried it again, muttering how peculiar while he did so. The older Mon's brain must have been working overtime to find out what was going on. Naruto thought he'd try the water again, but instead the man tried reaching out to him with his hand only to be stopped inches away from him. Azazel's face broke into a smile as his excitement began to increase as well as the pressure he was applying to try and reach him. A high-level magical barrier perhaps. He heard him mutter to himself. The blonde glanced behind him to see Calawarner also reaching out to him, but like her former boss, she too was stuck in place. After about 5 minutes of the two trying different methods to touch him, Azazel finally asks, "How does this work? I've never come across something like this. I suspected it was a magical barrier of some kind, but powering a barrier to this degree would consume your reserves at a rapid rate."
Deciding to throw the man a bone, he answered, "I control infinity."
Unknown to him, the fallen angel leader's mind flashed with the image of a small girl in gothic clothing the moment he uttered the words. "Go on," he motioned with his hand as he leaned forward.
"I answered your question already." His amusement with the man only grew when he saw him pout for a second before he snapped his finger. "Okay, how about this? Tell me how it works and I'll tell you how Badiz Abaddon's ability works. Not a bad deal, right?"
"I suppose I could do that. However, just to make sure you keep your word, you go first." Normally Azazel would have pointed out the fact that he needed to do his part first before he spoke, but decided to make an exception. He really wanted to know what this infinity entailed. Nodding in agreement, he began. Badiz Abaddon is incredibly proficient in his clan's innate ability known as Hole. As the name suggests, he can create holes or portals rather, that have multiple uses. It's versatile enough that he can absorb attacks and direct them back to whoever he wants. What's more, he can absorb the attacks and then create a portal anywhere he wants before redirecting the attacks, he explained.
"Only magical attacks?" he asked, still not very worried about it.
"No, physical attacks too. He can punch through a portal and have his fist appear anywhere else to land a hit. Teleportation can also be done by creating two portals and simply jumping from one to another. Apart from that, he's got a lot of stamina and incredible physical power. There's a reason the top 5 in the rating games are said to be immovable from their positions."
"Would Abaddon be a threat to you?" Naruto asked, genuinely curious. "It would be draining, of course, but I would still come out on top." Naruto nodded in acceptance. "Thank you for the information. I was already sure I'd win, but now there's absolutely no doubt in my mind."
Both Azazel and Calawarner blinked. He still wasn't the least bit concerned. Did he realize he wasn't fighting an up-and-coming young devil but a top-rank ultimate class? "So you're not even a little worried?" Calawarner was the one to ask this time. "Nope. If anything, he should be relatively easy to deal with," he replied, which only served to make Azazel want to know more. "Your infinity must be really something if you are that confident, but we digress. I believe it's your turn now." Naruto reeled in another fish before tossing it back. "Infinity is a technique unique to myself. At least I believe it is, since I've never seen anyone else with it. What I do is bring the concept of infinity to reality to distort space at will. The barrier from before is a manifestation of this concept. Think about this. How many times do you have to divide a number before it reaches 0? Azazel didn't have to consider the question for too long. It didn't matter how many times you did it, as it would just continue to inch closer but would never actually reach. As soon as the thought passed through his mind, his eyes widened and the blonde smiled, knowing he'd figured it out.
"I see you understand. When you attack me, you're not exactly stopped, but the closer you get, the slower you go until it looks like you're no longer moving.
So no matter how hard someone tries to attack, it will never actually reach you, which gives the illusion that you've created a barrier," Calawarner summarized. Exactly. For the first time in a while, the man was shocked. He'd come across many powerful abilities, both natural and granted through sacred gears in his time, but this was perhaps one of the most powerful he'd come across. The young man was quite literally untouchable, plus he was sure that there was more to it than just that. He'd mentioned distorting space and tried questioning him about it. Naruto, however, told him he'd just have to watch the rating game to find out more. The three decided to depart not too long after that, seeing as Azazel had some other business to attend to. Turning to Calawarner, he grabbed onto her shoulder and teleported them to land. come on, let's go get you some clothes. Head decided that while at the house, she'd work as a maid and look the part, and while in public she'd stay dressed in the suit as she looked damn good in it. The next couple of days were spent idly, everyone just enjoying themselves doing their own thing, though on one of the days, his queen did suggest he do a little training in preparation for the raiding game. He was confident he didn't need to train in order to win, but he would do so, if it meant keeping her from annoying him until he did it. The day of the raiding game was finally upon them, and the entire peerage was gathered in the living room waiting for their king to speak. I was contacted by the old bastard yesterday, he said, referring to Lord Bale. We have to be in the arena in 15 minutes. Can't wait. Hopefully he's got some people that can put up a fight. It's been a while since I've had my blood pumping in battle, Basby commented with a giant grin on his face, a sentiment that was shared by both Grimjow and Karasuba. Regardless of who you fight, I want you guys to dominate the battlefield. Don't show everything in your arsenal, but make it clear that we're stronger. A lot of big names will be watching, Naruto added. Mihawk, who was sitting down on the couch sipping on some wine, spoke next. It's a given that the Satans will be watching, but who else? The governor of the fallen angels, for one. He seemed really interested in this battle from the way he talked to me before, and I bet that the higher-ups in heaven will be watching as well. The minutes passed by quickly as they spoke among each other until finally it was time to go. The blonde summoned a magical circle beneath them, and in a split second they were gone. When they reappeared at the entrance of the arena, they weren't surprised to see a horde of people surrounding the building. It was actually expected. The third rank competing was something people wouldn't want to miss. I am willing to bet a large majority, if not everyone present, bet their money on bet, as Bisky said as they made their way inside the building. Megaman, who was currently sitting atop one of Guts' shoulders, laughed in amusement. The small portion who decides to bet on us are gonna be rich by the end of the day. The group stopped walking a minute later when another magic circle appeared in the middle of the hallway. To their surprise, Searsex Lucifer appeared before them and greeted them. Mr. Uzumaki, I am glad you and your peerage made it with no trouble.
You can just call me Naruto. Everything was smooth, which begs the question as to why you're here. Shouldn't you be with the other Satans? He asked. I am just making sure no one tried to sabotage anything before the game began. Lord Bael has a lot to lose, and I wouldn't put it past him to attempt something. So if you wouldn't mind, please follow me. It seemed they had a private escort. It was unnecessary but welcomed nonetheless. They followed him to a room where they were told to wait until they made the announcement. Once they call your team, the door will open and you'll step onto the field. Once both teams are ready, Ajuka will teleport you to the main stage within the dimensional gap and artificially create the terrain. Any questions? Searsex asked. The team glanced at each other, but no one spoke up. Very well, good luck, and do put on a good show. Naruto nodded in thanks and crossed his arms as the door was closed. It was quiet in the room for a minute before they heard the voice of Grayfia resonate through the arena. Good evening, everyone. My name is Grayfia Lucifuge, and I'll be the broadcaster for today's event between the third-ranked Badiz Abaddon and Naruto Uzumaki. Before we begin, Lord Bael, who's sponsoring the event, would like to say a few words, the woman announced. Thank you. I am sure everyone is anxious and excited to see one of the top 5 ranked devils in action, but please give me a moment of your time. I simply wish to inform everyone what the stakes of the game this evening will be. Naruto was sure that those outside and those watching the broadcast had given him their full attention. It was clear that those in high places knew what was going on, but regular everyday devils probably thought it was simply a regular match. Yes, you heard correctly. This is a high-stakes matchup. Should Naruto Uzumaki lose, he and his peerage will be executed. However, should he win, Lord Abaddon will be stripped of his rank and will be replaced by Uzumaki. With that said, I'll allow Grayfia to continue. Mihawk scoffed. He must be real confident to let everyone know about the stakes. Now everyone will believe we're on death row. All the more reason to kill his champion. Grimjow replied angrily. They heard Grayfia call Team Abaddon out and then followed suit when she called them. The door opened and the two peerages made their way to the center of the arena. Naruto and Badiz stood opposite each other, one with a blank face, the other with a sneer as he looked down. Do try not to die too fast. If I have to waste my time with you, the least I can do is give my fellow high-class devils a good show. Badiz spat, clearly upset that he had to fight against them. Baz B smirked and spat near the Mon's feet. Trust me, they're gonna get a show they'll never forget, he commented before flipping the man off. Just as he expected, the Mon's sneer turned into a look of pure hatred. Badiz took a step forward, ready to try and put him in his place, but stopped as the arena floor began to glow. Everyone soon found themselves surrounded by a colorful void that seemed to go on forever. The void soon changed from the vast nothingness into a large remote mountain village that had all types of trees and vegetation around. Naruto glanced around noticing Badiz and his group were gone. Closing his eyes and extending his senses, he felt large sources of energy on what was most likely the border of their arena, there on the other side. He was about to give his orders when the angelic voice of Grayfia was heard once more. Both teams have been sent to their respective sides of the field. The rating game has commenced. Scatter. In the blink of an eye he was by himself. He could feel that the opposing players were also making their way over, with their leader staying in place as well. It didn't take long before the first major explosion could be heard within the distance. Letting a small smile grace his face, he looked up to the artificial sky. I wonder. His body flickered before disappearing from its spot, and he reappeared a few thousand feet in the air. At this altitude he had a clear view of the entire field and could see every battle going on at the moment. Looking towards the end of the field, he could see the opposing king sitting down on a makeshift seat staring up at him but making no effort to attack. Seeing as he wasn't moving, Naruto turned his attention back down his peerage members who were locked in battle. His eyes were drawn to Baz B, who was currently fighting against what seemed like a Nekomata. She had white hair with small cat ears protruding from her head. She wore a blue jacket with yellow buttons and orange shorts with pinstripes, matching socks and blue shoes. Baz B versus Nekomata. Baz B stepped aside just as a bluish blur sped past him before dashing a few feet back to avoid a stomp where he was just standing. Oi, catgirl, what's your name? He asked. The Nekomata tilted her head, almost as if confused that he would be talking during their battle. Neferpido, why? I'd just like to know the name of the person I am about to beat into the ground, he said, a mad smile on his face. Before the woman could react, he appeared behind her, gripped the back of her head with his left hand and slammed her into the ground, not giving her a chance to get herself back together. His foot connected with her ribs, sending her away into the mountain face. Raising his right hand, he made a makeshift gun with his hands, using his index finger and thumb as she hit. The tip of his finger burst into a small flame that quickly turned into a straight beam as it was fired. He had to give credit where it was due, as she was well enough to move aside in time for the beam to pierce through the stone. Not bad, he complimented as she wiped some blood from her mouth. He watched in fascination as her facial expression changed into a crazed look as she crouched down. He could see the veins in her thighs begin to bulge as she prepared to attack. In the time it took him to blink, she made her move. She pushed off the ground with enough force to destroy where Shed previously stood. The problem with speed like that is that it's damn near impossible to stop, he remarked as a light aura surrounded his body. As soon as she was close enough, the aura burst into flames that quickly engulfed the surrounding area. The pressure built up due to the fire propelled her upwards into the sky. Baz B swiped his right hand into the air, his hand having made another gun shape, this time with two fingers extended rather than one. Burner finger 2. Two trails of fire that pierced the woman's midsection as she flew over him. He tilted his face away so as to not get blood in his eyes and only looked back once he heard a thud behind him. Turning around, he saw her gripping her stomach, trying in vain to stop the bleeding. Her body was burned in multiple places and bleeding profusely. I am surprised you haven't been removed from the game yet, he commented as he took in her battered form. She gasped for breath and stood up on very shaky legs. Her body began to glow with an ominous reddish-black aura. I am not done yet. I cannot fail Lord Abaddon, she whispered. The Mohawk sporting man couldn't help but respect the woman a little. She clearly wasn't going down until she was forced. However, he started to sense a feeling of danger from the woman. She was going all out apparently. Letting her use a trump card might force him to use more than necessary. He had to end this now. Dashing forward, he kicked her in the chin faster than she could react. Before her body went airborne, he grabbed her by the leg and slammed her back into the ground. He gripped her head and tossed her into the side of the mountain once more and fired off a burner finger 1. The fire once again only pierced stone as her body was engulfed in light and disappeared before the shot could connect. Badiz Abaddon's rook has been retired, Grayfia called out. Nodding in satisfaction, the blonde turned his attention to another battle going on just west of the previous one. Bisky, if anyone was to look at the two, they would clearly see a horrible match. A petite blonde versus a giant of a man covered in muscle. Unsurprisingly, he claimed his name was Muscular. It was a no-brainer why this fight would end poorly, but the confident look in Bisky's eyes would make some think otherwise. It happened in an instant. 1 minute she's standing in place, the next, she was gone. That's when her opponent felt it, a stinging pain in his left cheek, and then his ribs. He felt strike after strike and couldn't do anything to block it. The little blonde was merely a blur in the eyes of the devils. Muscular's prosthetic eyes zipped all around the area, locked onto his target. A sinister smirk etched itself across his face. Every little strike just made it wider and wider. His arms started to shake, it slithered and bulged until it was at the desired level. Bisky kept her onslaught of hit and run, aiming specifically for his joints, hoping to disable the psycho before. Wham! An agonizing pain suddenly appeared in the young girl's stomach. The cause? Muscular's giant fist. His arm had changed, now 3 times the size, fully covered with raw muscle, stopping at his wrist, every strike having more power and more ferocity. For a man of his stature, it was a wonder how he could move that fast. Bisky's eyes bulged, mouth agape in pain. She was able to see the second punch coming but was unable to stop it. A snap echoed across the battlefield. Silence reigned as almost all the observers froze from the horrendous sight that followed. The sight of the young girl getting her neck snapped was still shocking. Even if she was a willing participant, the force of the blow sent her skidding across the ground until the friction forced her to stop. She laid there in a heap, unmoving. Muscular, satisfied with himself, started to walk away. He hadn't even noticed that Grayfia had never called out whether she had been retired or not. However, that was soon to be resolved, as the unmoving heap of flesh started to move. He, giggled the little girl, frightening the hearts of the devils watching the broadcast. Muscular stopped dead in his tracks, body tensing, his remaining eye widened dramatically. Swiftly turning around, he spotted Bisky rising to her hands and knees, hunched over as she started to shake. So you survived that, huh? Not bad. One of my normal punches can usually bury someone 10 feet under, and you just took something that had a little more oomph. Not bad at all. I always let people get a hit in. As a tribute, Bisky's body started to tremble. The once small girl started to grow and grow and grow, until she eclipsed Muscular's own height. Her body, which was once petite, bulged with outstanding muscle. Muscular blinked, and in that minuscule second was sent flying by the strongest blow he's ever felt in his entire life. Because I can't restrain myself when I turn back to this form. No longer was her voice soft and sweet, it was raw and deep. The blond man shook his head to get rid of the dots that plagued his vision. His remaining eye was wide and his heart felt like it dropped into his stomach. What the hell? In a fraction of a second he was struck in the jaw just like earlier. This time it didn't sting, it hurt. He felt as if his head was nearly knocked off his shoulders, sent flying across the field. He couldn't move. He felt paralyzed for that brief moment. Squinting from the pain, he slowly opened his eye, only to widen it in horror. She was standing there, waiting for him. Her face was blank, but her eyes. Another blow. Then another and another. Each blow felt like it was tearing him apart. She let him go, watching apathetically as he skidded across the ground, just like she did moments ago. Muscular shakily stood up. He looked crazed, eye bloodshot, drooling like a feral dog. You little bitch. His body started to bulge. More muscle started to cover his form until he looked like the monster that he was. Bisky straightened her shoulders, put one foot back and cocked her right arm. The battle was over before it began. 2 fists met, battling for dominance. The amount of energy released enough to damage the surrounding terrain. Bisky could see Muscular's eyes widen as the muscle around his arm began to tear before it exploded, no longer able to withstand the power of the once small girl. Her arm continued moving forward until it collided with his face. She could feel some of the bones of his skull crack under the pressure. Before he could be sent soaring through the air, his body glowed white and disappeared. Bediz Abaddon's pawn has been retired, Grayfia announced. Nice work, he complimented as he watched her revert back to her childish form. She clapped her hands and patted her dress before dashing in the direction of someone else. He was forced to tilt his head to avoid a blast of fire that had been shot from below. Following the trail, he saw who was responsible and watched, eager to see how it would go. Mereoleona looked annoyed, not necessarily for following her master's orders, but with who she had to fight. Her opponent was an androgynous-looking person with long black hair that was spiked downward and came out of a headband. They wore a sort of crop top as well as a skirt but sounded masculine. Not only that, it had a weird name, Envy. At least that's what their teammate called it before departing. So it's you and me, huh? If there's one thing she despises in this world, it's weak opponents. TCH, you have a lot of nerve trying to fight me. Can't you see I am out of your league? However, her opponent didn't respond to her taunts. Mereoleona smirked and looked downright frightening. Maybe you will learn once I've burnt you to a crisp. Channeling her magic, an intense heat covered her fist. Envy was interrupted by the fiery fist that was trying to combust their head. She could smell her flesh cooking. Next was a strike to her ribs. Envy screamed in agony as it felt like they were being cooked from the inside out. Mereoleona finished her attack with a devastating uppercut, leaving her opponent to lay flat on her back sizzling. TCH, another damn disappointment. She started to walk away, disappointment still clear, but then she stopped. Envy's name wasn't called. She slowly turned, brow raised in confusion as she studied their prone form. Crack. The ground broke beneath her and a massive green hand swiped at the noblewoman. She was faster, easily dodging each and every attack. You bitch. That hurt. Envy's body seemed to break apart then put itself back together again. They rose seemingly like a puppet. Her face had a demented look as her skin started to look sickly. Her face had a demented look as her skin started to turn from a sickly pale to an unearthly dark green. I would say you looked better before, but honestly this is an improvement. I'll fucking rip you apart. Mereoleona looked disgusted as her opponent's body started to mutate and morph. She kept growing until she was roughly 20 meters tall. Her true form was hideous. Just looking at it made the noblewoman nauseous. You know what? Go back. The sight of you disgusts me. I'll rip you apart. Then I'll find your pathetic king and kill him slowly. Alright. Now you've pissed me off. The noblewoman was completely surrounded by her flames. Slowly she lifted off the ground until she was high for everyone to see. Her flames started to circle around her and grow. To all the onlookers watching the broadcast, it was like staring at the sun. Envy growled, firing off some alchemist magic to try and disrupt whatever her enemy was doing, but no matter how many blasts she fired or how strong they were, it had no effect. Die, you trash. Just like that, the ball of fire crashed into Envy, lighting her and everything around her in a blaze. The monstrosity of a devil screeched in agony. No. The smoke cleared, revealing a scorched earth with a charred body lying dead center. Envy was now nothing but a burnt crisp, didn't move, couldn't move, even if they wanted to. The only sign they were alive was the slight moving of their lips. Like her fellow peerage members, her body was enveloped in light before disappearing. Bediz Abaddon's pawn has been retired. Mereoleona started to walk away, wondering what was happening with the rest of her peerage members. Naruto couldn't help but smirk as he watched her walk away. He wanted to watch another battle but turned his attention back to their leader, who was now standing up. It seemed he knew that at the rate things were going he'd be peerageless in no time. Deciding it was time, he reappeared a few feet away from the nobleman and met his stare. That mountain face behind you, Naruto called out, pointing behind Bediz, who didn't turn. That's where it's going to end for you. Bediz remained silent, which was surprising considering how much he loved the sound of his own voice. Instead he raised his hand, holding his palm out to the blonde, and a magical circle formed. Naruto raised an eyebrow as a green orb was formed which began growing in size before it was shot in his direction. The spectators watched in shock as the blonde didn't move an inch from his place, deciding to take the full brunt of the attack head on. So much for your threat of ending me. Bediz spat as he stared into the dark cloud generated by the attack. His victory was short-lived, however, when the smoke began to clear and his opponent was still standing in the same spot, with not even a scratch on him. Good attack, but not good enough. How about you do yourself a favor? Forfeit and save yourself some of that useless pride, otherwise, you wouldn't be left with even that when this match is over. Naruto offered as he raised a finger up to eye level. 4 beams of red light spiraled onto the tip of his finger, creating a small marble-sized ball. So? He asked. Similarly to him, Bediz stood in place, not answering the question or putting up any form of defense. Naruto had to stop himself from smirking at the man. His plan was easy enough to figure out. He'd wait until he fired the attack and open up a hole and direct it back to him. If Azazel hadn't told him about it, maybe he'd be caught off guard slightly. Unfortunately, he was prepared and he had a counter ready just for this occasion. Red, the orb changed to white and began to glow brighter and brighter before detonating. The moment the attack went off, he distorted space around Bediz. Knowing a portal was coming, dashing forward, he saw the man had actually been forced to dodge as part of his arm was slightly charred. Naruto distorted the space around him to warp himself next to the man and landed a punch on the right side of his face. While he may not be the most powerful in terms of brute strength, he did pack a punch. Bediz was knocked back. A bruise formed on his face from the force of the punch. Damn you, the man seethed as he spit some blood on the ground. He dashed back and revealed his wings before taking to the skies. The man raised his arms and created hundreds of small black orbs before raining them down on the field below. Bediz didn't get a chance to see if it worked as his vision went black due to Naruto's hand gripping it. The moment the field was littered with attacks, Naruto had teleported next to the man and began his counter, willing space to propel him. He plummeted down, taking the man with him. Upon impact he didn't let go, however, and continued moving forward, creating a small trench using Bedez's body. He jumped off right on time to avoid a red blast, shot from the Mon's hand. I'll give you one last chance. Just from that brief exchange I know you're aware. I am faster than you and can cancel out your whole ability. Without those you're nothing. Naruto taunted. To once again prove his point, he ran forward, dodging all the projectiles the man tried stopping him with. His punch was blocked, but while they were busy exchanging moves, Bediz never saw that the space around his left leg began to distort ever so slightly. Naruto made sure to focus his attacks around the face area to block the Mon's field of vision for a second and sliced. As expected, Bedez's eyes widened as his balance was thrown off. The man looked down at his leg, which had been amputated right at the knee. His lack of focus resulted in Naruto grabbing him by the hand and pulling him forward before delivering a punch to his solar plexus. The punch was hard enough that it drew blood out of the mouth of his opponent. However, the assault didn't end there, having locked his hand in place. Naruto brought him closer and repeatedly punched the man. After 12 or so consecutive punches, he brought his palm up to the monster's chest and fired red at point-blank range, making sure to send him back in the direction where the battle started, teleporting himself to him. Naruto smiled in satisfaction at the state the once arrogant man was in. He was in a sitting position against the mountain face, the stump that was his leg continuously bleeding. Ah! Badiz yelled as Naruto got close and tried another magical attack. This time it was a dark red orb that had a black outer glow. Similarly to all the other attacks up until this point, the attack was useless as it seemingly stopped right before reaching him. It changed color to black briefly before exploding. The result was a massive mushroom cloud that could be seen from all areas of the field. For a last resort, that wasn't half bad, Naruto commented as he walked out of the smoke unharmed. But now it's time to make good on my word. Luckily the system hasn't removed you from the game yet. That mountain face behind you is the border of the arena, which means no matter how hard it's hit it won't break. What happened next was something every supernatural creature watching would never forget. Naruto appeared in front of the downed man and seemingly pushed the air in front of him, and just like that, Badiz Abaddon, one of the men said to be immovable from his position, was reduced to a splatter of blood and mutilated body parts on the wall. Badiz Abaddon has been eliminated. Winner Naruto Uzumaki. Even Grayfia's voice couldn't hide the shock she felt. The arena faded back into the colorless void and all participants were teleported back into the arena within the underworld. Immediately devils raced inside to look over the remains of the nobleman. Naruto turned around to see Lord Biel staring at him in shock. Naruto flashed him a peace sign before making his way towards Sirzex, who had just entered the building. Needless to say, the next couple of days in the underworld were going to be hectic. The underworld was in shock, even after a couple of days passed since the raiding game between Badiz Abaddon and the newcomer Naruto Uzumaki. Talk of their match was prevalent. While there was some talk of the matches between their peerage members, what most people were talking about was the conclusion to the match. Badiz Abaddon, the man who'd been ranked number 3 for years, had been killed. It was shocking enough that had died, but it was the way he died that had people talking. The man had been turned into nothing more than paste on the walls in front of the entirety of the Devil Society. The more prejudiced devils, mostly that of the older generation, had their world literally flipped in the span of a day. One of the pureblood devils of their society, a very powerful one at that, had been killed by someone who was still just a kid in their eyes. While most wouldn't miss him per se, they were still in disarray at what his loss meant for them as a whole. The younger devils were shocked as well, though for completely different reasons. Someone in their generation suddenly appeared and knocked off one of the men who was said to be immovable from his spot. Understandably, that set off a wave of hope for those of the lower houses and status. This proved that the rhetoric the older devils spewed about pure bloods being superior was bullshit. Though the entirety of the underworld was discussing the match, there were also 2 other devils that were frequently brought up in the conversation. Dehauser Belial and Roygun Belphegor, the current first and second rank in the rating games. It was a widely accepted fact that those in the top wouldn't move from their spots, so for one to be so easily usurped raised questions. How strong was Uzumaki exactly? If he was able to toy with an ultimate class devil while holding back most of his abilities, what else could he do? When would he challenge them for the second and first place spots? All of these were questions one would hear while traveling through any part of the underworld. While most people were caught up in the excitement, however, one devil had wanted nothing more than for everyone to forget about the whole thing. The man known simply as Lord Biel to most, had been on the receiving end of silent scrutiny. No one dared say anything out loud to the head of the Biel clan, but he could see it. Lord Biel knew the other lords blamed him for the death of one of the purebloods of their society. Of all the things he expected from that raiding game, Badiz dying was not one of them. It might seem bad now, but there was still a way to salvage this. He looked at the figure sitting across from him. The woman looked to be in her early 20s with bright pink hair along with 2 horns protruding from her head. She had very large breasts, a slim waist, and wore a form-fitting high-cut dress with high slits showing off a pair of wonderful legs. She's the current second rank of the rating games, Roygun Belphegor. I must say, it was a surprise to hear that you wish to speak to me. I think I have an idea as to why I am here, but please, do tell me, she spoke. Lord Biel looked at her with a stoic face, not letting anything show. First, let me thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I know that you must be very busy lately. As to why you're here, I was hoping you would be willing to do a small favor for me. Roygun smirked and crossed one leg over the other. What small favor would that be? she asked in a knowing tone. "I'd like to sponsor," was as far as he got before the woman in front of him put a hand up. The man had to hold back the urge to scowl at the display. No one in their right mind ever told him when to stop talking, not even the Satans. He would overlook this though. He needed her to comply with him. Dehauser would have been preferred, but the man wouldn't take his request to meet. Perhaps he had a clue about the incident with Claria? "Let me stop you right there, Lord Biel. I am sure I can finish what you wanted to say. I'd like to sponsor a game between you and Naruto Uzumaki, is that right?" she asked. The man didn't provide a response. "I know you're an intelligent man, which is why I am wondering why you decided to have Badiz Abaddon be your champion. Did you know I had to talk him out of attacking your clan a few years ago?" He did know about that. "I am aware, but he owed me a few favors for pulling some strings in the past and had no choice." She nodded in understanding. It was just like the man to have powerful people under his thumb. "I see, and because of that he's dead." The man was turned into a smear on the wall with millions of people watching it happen in real time. "That's a fate I don't want to share," she said plainly. While she was a powerful devil, it didn't mean she was willing to risk her life against an opponent she knew next to nothing about. Lord Biel laced his fingers together in front of his face and rested his elbows on his desk. "It is unfortunate what happened to Badiz, but it is a known fact that you were more powerful than he was. You've taken on anyone who challenged you in the past with no hesitation. So why now? Surely you don't believe Uzumaki can beat you." "Not with your crack ability," he said, trying to stroke her ego. "Please don't insult my intelligence, Lord Biel. Everyone I've battled against, I've had time to study and prepare for. There's no way to prepare against an opponent who has no information about himself to study." Roigon let a pleased smile appear on her face before she continued. "Besides, what little information there is about him is useless. After all, you never spoke about Naruto Biel at all in the past few years." For the first time since their meeting started, Lord Biel let an emotion break through his facade, surprise followed by suspicion, and finally anger. "How do you know about that boy?" he asked, flaring his power slightly, a display that did nothing to the beauty sitting before him. "I have my sources," she answered happily. "Unfortunately, Lord Biel, I have to decline your proposal. You can still try your luck with Dehauser Belial. He might be more willing than I am. After all, he is the reigning champion." Roigon glanced at the clock and patted her dress down. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend to." The Belphegor clan insignia appeared below her and she was gone. Now alone in his office, Lord Biel finally let the scowl had been holding back mar his face. "Uzumaki," he seethed. "Don't think this is over." He took a deep breath to control himself and made his way out of his office. He needed to think. XXXXXXXXXXX. While Lord Biel was left to contemplate his next move, Naruto was making his way towards a large lavish room inside the large arena where the rating games took place. After his victory over Badiz, Sirzex had told him he would need to attend a meeting between the top 5 since had disrupted future matches. The blonde couldn't help but smirk. He was sure old man Biel was punching the air in frustration that his plan didn't go as he expected. Not only did the thought of his former head of house being pissed make him feel good, but he was also excited for the celebration he was going to have with his peerage. They weren't always gathered in the same place. Most of the time others were off doing jobs or training. They were going to enjoy themselves while they had the chance. He shook his head of those thoughts when he reached the door he was instructed to find. Not knowing whether he should knock or not, he shrugged and let himself in. The inside of the room was as lavish as the rest of the building. A large elongated table sat in the middle of the room. Since they were in one of the upper floors, the windows had a rather nice view of the streets down below. Naruto's eyes quickly locked on to the 4 devils who were seated already. At one end of the table sat a white-haired man wearing a high-collar red cloak that was open at the front, revealing the mont's muscular chest as well as exposing a necklace with a long red jewel at the end. Dehauser, he thought to himself. The man stared back at him with a blank face, but not one of dismissal. It was almost as if he was sizing him up, the same way Naruto was doing to him. Even with his seemingly nonchalant expression, Naruto could tell the man was on a completely different level than Badiz was. His eyes looked to the mont's left where a young-looking woman with pink hair that was braided and came down the side and horns on her head sat. He couldn't help but notice she was very pretty, but he didn't let that distract him too long. Like Dehauser, he could sense that she was powerful, more so than Badiz, but not on the white-haired mont's level. He was beginning to see why they'd stayed in their positions for so long if the power gaps between them were this large. He glanced at the empty seat beside her and then looked across the table where 2 other devils sat. Unlike the previous 2, they were looking at him with contempt clear in their eyes. Naruto flashed a peace sign at them and made his way over to the vacant seat next to the woman. She must be the second rank, Roigon Belphegor. The woman turned to him the moment he sat down and smiled kindly at him. Welcome. Beelzebub-sama should be here momentarily, she said before leaning closer to him, her face a few inches away from his. You're cuter up close. Very nice, she purred. Naruto raised an eyebrow. This was not what he was expecting from one of his targets. Oi Uzumaki! Yelled one of the devils sitting across from him. Naruto turned to them with an unimpressed look on his face. What is it? Naruto asked. Irritated, the one who spoke didn't get a chance to continue to spout off as the door opened once again, revealing a tall green-haired man with a gray shirt under a green jacket with yellow and black accents, along with a purple ascot around his neck. The two devils immediately sat straighter and tried to look as nonchalant as possible. It was a pathetic display in his opinion. He glanced over at the first and second ranked competitors and saw that they were as relaxed as could be. Thank you all for being here on time. Beelzebub began taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. It's strange seeing you all here since we haven't gathered in so many years, but it's also exciting in a sense, he said, taking a look towards the new arrival. Uzumaki. Allow me to welcome you to the top 5 of the rating games. I am sure you know already, but let me introduce you, he said, motioning his hand forward. First rank, the Emperor Dehauser Belial. Second rank, Roygun Belphegor. Fourth rank, Adamas Apollyon. And finally fifth rank, Virgil Barbatos. Naruto waved at Dehauser and Roygun cheerfully, but made sure to mockingly wave at the last two. Yo. Nice to meet you guys, Naruto said, briefly standing up. Beelzebub nodded at him and spoke again. The reason we're having this meeting is to discuss how your usurpation of the former third rank affects the matches that had been previously scheduled. He placed a small device on the table which lit up, displaying a screen in the air for them to see. The screen showed their names, as well as dates next to another team name. Excuse me, Beelzebub-sama, Adamas interjected, if he's only disrupted the matches that Badiz was supposed to participate in, why exactly are we here? He asked, shooting a dirty look towards the blonde. That's because now that a new devil has taken his place, schedules have changed. The matches were planned with both parties' schedules in mind. Now that he's here, some matches might need to be rescheduled, which means some of yours might as well, he explained calmly. The next hour or so was spent between the 6 of them rescheduling future matches. For the most part he was put up against clans such as the Amos, Person, Glacia Labelas, Barith, and Furnius, all minor competitors in his eyes. While they may be powerful against some low or middle-class devils, to him they wouldn't be much trouble. He did notice, however, that none of them were matched up against each other. He and Adamas Apollyon were the only ones facing members of the top 10. Apollyon would be facing the 7th-ranked Rudiger Rosenkreuz, while Naruto would be battling against Ruvel Phoenix, who was ranked 8th. While he didn't mind facing someone ranked in the top 10, Ruvel wasn't who he was after. Naruto glanced at everyone else and saw that, for the most part, they seemed to be content with the matches in their time slots. Well, that's about it, Beelzebub announced happily. Does anyone have any changes they'd like to make before they're official? He asked. The blonde could tell that the two devils beneath him wanted to say something but seemed to be losing their nerve now that one of the Satans was in the room. Pathetic, really. If you don't mind, I have some things I'd like to say, Naruto commented as he stood up. The green-haired Satan sat down in his seat and turned off the device before nodding at him to go ahead. The blonde smiled mischievously and stood up before proceeding to walk around the room slowly for dramatic effect. I just want to start by saying that even though I am not facing you guys, know that I am coming for you, he said, looking at the players on the table. Don't go getting a big head, Uzumaki. Virgil shot back angrily. Badiz got what was coming to him for being arrogant, but don't think it'll be the same for us. Naruto stared at him, completely unimpressed with the man. Oh, I am sorry, I should have clarified. I wasn't talking to you guys, he said, pointing at both Virgil and Adamas before moving his finger over to the other two devils. I was talking to them. Roygun stared back at him with her head resting on a fist and one leg sensually crossed over the other. She had a challenging smile on her face when she heard his declaration. Dehauser meanwhile hadn't changed facial expression throughout the entire meeting. His answers were straight and to the point anytime he was asked anything and hardly said a word otherwise. Not even Beelzebub could stop himself from slightly smirking at the exchange. Now he could see why Searzex found the boy interesting. No devil in their right mind would casually dismiss devils of their caliber, so to see it happening was an interesting experience. Make no mistake about it, I have every intention to challenge you for your ranks in the near future. Also, Beelzebub, Naruto called out. The green-haired Satan raised an eyebrow at the young devil. Everyone here has been in their position for a long time, right? Which means they would most likely have very old evil piece sets, correct? Beelzebub's eyes widened, as did everyone else's at the question. That's correct. Everyone here was given sets that are no longer in use by devils in the underworld. Naruto nodded in satisfaction and created a small magical circle in his palm. I see. He turned back to the devils just to give you guys something to think about. I made it here without using this, he said, placing a small red king piece on the table in front of them. Even the ever-stoic Dehauser now looked at him with some surprise. He glanced at the piece and then back at the blonde with a look of approval. Unknown to Naruto had actually earned some respect in the older devil's eyes. How many of you here can say the same? Naruto asked. Any trace of his playful persona now gone, he looked from devil to devil and noticed that even Roigon was staring at him with a serious expression. The 4th and 5th ranked devils looked at him wide-eyed, their expressions even showing a bit of awe. Naruto did notice that Dehauser had adjusted his arms in front of his chest so that his hands could be seen slightly. To his surprise, the man also held a red king piece in between his fingers. So only the Emperor seemingly made it to the top without any help, Naruto thought to himself. He knew Dehauser was powerful. He had to be in order to reign at the top. To make it there using only his strength though, that was something else completely. If the gap between him and Roigon was that large without the piece, Naruto wondered how large it would be with it. Just like Dehauser, Naruto's respect for the man went up immensely. Beelzebub stood up as Naruto made his chess piece disappear and chuckled to himself softly. This day is certainly full of surprises. You wouldn't mind meeting me in a few days to discuss that king piece, would you? Naruto shook his head. Excellent. Now then, I look forward to seeing you all compete. Uzumaki, you've challenged two very powerful people today. The underworld will watch your career with great interest. The man disappeared via his magic circle, leaving the top 5 to themselves. Well, that was intense, Roigon said, her cheerful persona back on display as she looked at the blonde. If you want a match, I am sure we can set something up, she said as she slid up next to him, running the back of her index finger down his cheek. Maybe we can discuss something over dinner sometime. Tisk. I am out of here, Virgil spat, a sentiment that was mirrored by Adama's as both of them disappeared from the room. Dehauser stood up and created a magic circle underneath him as well. I am sure I'll be seeing you very soon, Uzumaki, he said before disappearing. Now alone, the two devils stayed silent for a few moments before the woman broke the silence. So dinner? Naruto smirked. He liked this woman. In the end, he agreed to get in contact with her to discuss a potential rating game between the two. Having finished their business, the last two devils vacated the premises. XXXXXXXXX Naruto reappeared in the master bedroom of the compound he owned in Kuo and threw himself on the bed. Landing on his back, he closed his eyes and extended his senses around the entire place. Only 3 people are here right now. He glanced at the clock he had sitting atop a small drawer next to his bed and saw it was only about 4 p.m. The small party they were throwing to celebrate their victory over Badiz was Megumin's idea, but it quickly caught traction and they agreed to do it today at 5. They're probably out buying everything, he thought to himself as he put his arms behind his head. His eyes quickly darted to his door, which began opening a second later. Harabelle walked in and placed 3 bags on the ground at the foot of the bed. She must have just gotten back, he realized as he took in her clothing. Rather than her usual white uniform she wore, she had on black skin-tight pants along with a white tank top and black shoes. She stretched and bent over to undo her laces and kick her shoes off. The blonde couldn't help but appreciate her wonderful ass, even if it was still covered. Everyone is out buying stuff for the party, she said, confirming his earlier thoughts. How did the meeting go? She asked as she began wiggling herself out of her pants. Naruto took a second to respond. Eyes still mesmerized by the sight in front of him. It wasn't the first time had seen her undress, but it still captivated him the same every time. About as expected, he replied, admiring her black lacy panties. I let both Dehauser and Roigon know I plan to challenge them soon. It turns out Dehauser is most likely the only one in the top 5 aside from me who isn't boosting his power with a king piece. Harabelle made her way onto the bed, crawling towards him as he spoke. You're sure? She asked as she hovered over him. Yup. He summoned it discreetly enough to let me see it. Other than that, I have a meeting with Beelzebub to discuss it in the future. I am free the rest of the day, he said as his hands reached up to gently rub her sides up and down. That's good. We have an hour before everyone returns. Maybe we can start our celebration early. To entice him even further, she sat upright on top of him and pulled her tank top up over her head, revealing a black bra. The woman quickly reached behind her and undid the straps, allowing the bra to fall and revealing her breasts to her king. Naruto's eyes were naturally drawn to them. You're awfully forward today, he teased, taking one of her nipples in between his fingers. I don't have Kaguya here to hog you, so I am taking advantage of this moment. I have an hour with you to myself. She had to bite her lip when he started playfully pulling on her nipple he was playing with. Well, who am I to deny you? He sat up, pressing his chest against hers and rested his hands on her hips while she threw her arms around his neck. The two blondes closed the distance between their mouths and engaged in a kiss that started slow and sensual but quickly got more aggressive. Tear bit on his bottom lip and slowly began rocking her panty-covered ass on him. Naruto reached up to knead one of her breasts with one hand while the other rubbed her womanhood over the fabric covering it. After only a few seconds he could feel it begin to dampen and he knew she was ready. Pulling back, he quickly discarded his shirt and was about to reach for his pants but stopped when Tear placed one of her hands over his and shook her head. "Lay down, I'll do it," she ordered, seeing no reason to argue. Naruto laid back and let the woman do as she pleased. Tear once again hovered over him and began kissing his neck, making her way down his chest and stomach until she reached his waist. Her small hands made quick work on the button on his pants and unzipped them. To help her out slightly, he raised himself up so that she could pull his pants down with ease. She looked up at him with a look no porn star could dream to match and pulled down his boxers, letting his cock free. "There we go," she purred. Just looking at her was enough to make it begin to rise up in excitement. Tear wasted no time and took his member into her mouth, keeping only the tip in at first before beginning to take more. Naruto reached forward and moved some stray hair out of the woman's beautiful face so he could see her better. She locked eyes with him and slowly began to take more of him into her mouth. The blonde could feel her tongue gliding across him as she inched closer to his pelvis. Just before her nose could touch his body, he felt himself touch the back of her throat and she stopped. Gak. Tear coughed and pulled back, her eyes slightly watery from partially choking. She looked up at him, her hand still stroking up and down, and took him in again. This was one of the reasons Naruto loved Tear. She was committed. If she wanted to do something, she'd try again and again until she did it. The woman hummed lightly this time and took him deeper and deeper until finally, she was able to take him in completely. Naruto's cock was enveloped in wet warmth that almost made him blow his wad right then and there. Grabbing her by the hair, he gently pulled back, taking great pleasure in her tongue still trailing him as he did so. "What's wrong?" she asked, taking deep breaths. She was breathing heavily and had even reached into her panties to stimulate herself sometime during her blowjob. "Nothing. That was amazing, but it's time to have some real fun," he replied. The woman smirked at him and stood over him before slowly pulling her panties down. From his position he was able to see she was nice and wet. Some of her wetness had even clung to the panties as she pulled down, connecting to her womanhood with a small strand. She tossed the wet panties off to the side and squatted down until the head of his cock was brushing up against her entrance. Naruto enjoyed the feeling of his head rubbing back and forth against her lips as she teased herself. Oh, how he wanted to grab her by the hips and impale her, but had let her have her fun. Finally, after a bit of teasing, she slowly began to sink down on him. Naruto let out a small hum of pleasure as he felt her walls tighten up around him as he sheathed himself inside her. Likewise, Tear let out a sensual moan as she could feel herself being stretched by her king. "Fuck, you're nice and tight," Naruto complimented, now taking hold of her hips. Tear smiled as she began to bounce up and down on him and placed her hands on his chest for support. Naruto smirked to himself as the tanned beauty currently impaling herself on him closed her eyes and bit her lip to try and keep her moans down. It didn't do much good as he was hitting her sweet spot, which would make her raise her voice. He reached around behind her and smacked each cheek as she came down. The tightening of her walls after each smack was not missed. Smiling mischievously, he smacked one cheek after another every time she landed. "Oh fuck," she purred after one particularly hard smack. "Naruto, I am gonna." She didn't finish her sentence, instead speeding up her motions like she was in distress. He saw the glazed look in her eyes as she tried to speed up her orgasm. Part of him wanted to chuckle at her desperation and delay it, but he stopped himself. He could feel his own release coming and he wanted to have her seeing stars. He rolled them over so she was laying on her back and grabbed one of her legs. Throwing it over his shoulder, he turned her slightly so she was on her side. Allowing him to pump deeper into her, Tear tightened up as much as she could and gripped the bedsheets as hard as she could. Seeing this, Naruto drilled into her with as much ferocity as he could muster. He was glad almost no one was home as the sound of the headboard hitting the wall would easily give away what they were doing. They'd been going at it for well over 20 minutes now and he wanted to make it count. "Don't stop, Naruto. Please don't stop. I am so close," Tear cried, thrusting back trying to match his pace. "I don't plan to." He hammered away at her for 5 more minutes before it finally happened. Tear began to convulse slightly, her mouth opening into a silent scream as her orgasm finally hit. While she was experiencing nirvana, Naruto made sure to keep his pace to add to the pleasure she was feeling. Like Tear, his release finally hit as well. Just as hers was dying down, thrusting in as far as he could go, he emptied himself. The feeling of filling up a beautiful woman like Tear never failed to leave him with a heightened sense of accomplishment. He stayed buried inside of her for a minute or two, filling her to the brim with his seed. He could feel Tyr's womanhood pulsing as if trying to milk every last drop from him. He briefly wondered how he didn't have a kid yet with how often he came inside both Tyr and Kaguya, but didn't dwell on it for too long. This was about Tyr and making sure she was well taken care of. Finally his release came to an end and he pulled himself out of her. Inch by inch he removed himself, having to fight against her walls who were adamant that he stayed buried there. Her pussy was still convulsing slightly once he was out, opening and closing slightly, no doubt still sensitive from her orgasm. Like Shed done earlier, he made his way over until he was on top of her. "Well? How are you feeling?" he asked. Tyr slowly turned her head to him and brought his head down for a kiss. Their two lips mushed together slowly for a second before parting. "Amazing," she replied tiredly but with a smile on her face. Naruto really wished she would smile more instead of always having her serious demeanor on display. "Well, I hope you aren't spent because we still have plenty of time," he shot back, lightly nibbling on her neck. Her eyes widened slightly as she was turned around to lay on her stomach. "Wait. I am still sensitive," she moaned as she felt him enter her again. Naruto took it slow this time, letting her take a moment to prepare herself for another pounding. "Sorry Tyr, but you're just too beautiful for me to only have you once," he said, leaning down to plant some kisses on her lower back. The woman looked back and even though he could tell she was clearly tired, she sent him a challenging smirk. "Fine, show me how beautiful you think I am." For the remainder of their time Tyr experienced 4 more mind-blowing orgasms as well as 1 facial. After Naruto blew his last load inside her again, he pulled out and watched as the woman let herself fall on her back on the bed with her eyes closed. "I'll join you guys in a bit," she groaned, but the smile on her face didn't disappear. "I won't be able to walk right now," she said in amusement. Naruto smiled and planted a kiss on her forehead before heading to the shower. He could sense most everyone out back and wanted to enjoy some of the food he could smell cooking. 20 minutes later he joined the festivities dressed in regular black jeans and a gray button-up shirt. "Yo," he greeted as he took a plate and served himself some of the food that Baz B had cooked up. "About damn time you joined us," Grimjow replied with a mad smirk on his face. "I was busy," he shot back. Tsunade, who had just served Megaman seconds, glared at him. "I am sure you were. You're lucky the 2 kids came straight out here so they didn't have to hear you and Tyr fucking like rabbits. I swear you kids don't," she grumbled as she walked away. Maybe they'd gotten a little carried away. He made a mental note to buy her something nice to have her overlook this. Had forgotten how Shed basically taken on the mother role for Mob and Megaman, seeing as they were young and impressionable. Shed said on more than one occasion that she didn't want them picking up bad habits from Grimjow and Baz B. An hour into their little celebration, Tyr decided to finally join them. She had her usual stoic look on her face again, but he was sure everyone could tell she had a slight limp in her step. As they enjoyed their food and were talking about the match or anything else that came up, almost everyone sensed a powerful presence show up at the front door. "You expecting anyone?" Mereoleona asked curiously. "It's Azazel-sama," Calawarner responded as she took a bite from her food. Since Shed picked to work for Naruto, Shed been given the role of a maid while at the compound and thus wore a traditional black and white maid outfit. Fortunately for her, none of them mistreated her and she actually found herself getting along with most people in the house. She hoped he'd be here to get her back but instantly shot that down. If had wanted her he wouldn't have agreed to let her new boss decide what happened to her. Naruto stood up and made his way into the house, only to return a moment later with the Governor General of the Fallen Angels in tow. "Baz, set him up with some food. Calawarner, get the man a drink," he ordered. Azazel smiled as the food was given to him and thanked everyone for allowing him to join in on their festivities. "Delicious," he complimented the food. "I have to say, I was really impressed with that rating game," he continued. "I bet on you to win after our chat, but I definitely wasn't expecting you to kill him. You've got the entire supernatural world talking about it." Naruto took a sip of his drink and smirked. "I did tell you I was confident, didn't I?" The fallen angel leader nodded and took a sip of his drink. "You did. I just wasn't expecting you to off a member of the top 5. I don't think anyone was. You guys shut him and his peerage down and made it look easy." That managed to get some smug looks from some of the members in the peerage. "I am glad you enjoyed yourself. Now I do have to ask. Why are you here?" the blonde wondered. Azazel immediately took on his serious face and put his food and drink down. "As you know, rating games between big names can be watched by all sorts of supernatural species, not just devils." Naruto nodded. "I have no doubt that the devils, angels, fallen angels, and even other factions know about your power now. Some of them will most likely seek you out to have you join them, and not all of them will take no for an answer." "You're referring to the Chaos Brigade?" Naruto asked. If Azazel was surprised he didn't show it. "You're familiar with them?" Yeah. I ran into one of their members a while ago and got some information out of them, Naruto replied. So you're aware that they're led by the Infinite Dragon God? Azazel questioned. Naruto answered with another nod. Yup. So is that what you came for? To warn us about her? Partially. I am here to propose an alliance between you and the fallen angels, the man revealed. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly. While they were definitely the smallest of the three factions, they still had a large number of members in their ranks. Azazel must have seen his look as he decided to quickly continue. While I am sure you can take care of yourselves, even you would lose some of your people if Ophis sent the entirety of her forces after you. Not only that, but you'd also have some very powerful and resourceful people on your side, including myself and the Hakuryuko, to name two. What do you get out of this? Tyr asked, taking a seat next to the blonde. You've been telling us about what you can offer us, but I am sure there's something beneficial to you for you to make this offer. That's correct, young lady. We get a deterrent. It's no secret that the war between the three factions isn't over. We're simply at a ceasefire. You don't have your own house and haven't sworn yourself to the Satans, so you're not officially part of the underworld. They wouldn't attack knowing that you're backing us up. Likewise, heaven would also think twice knowing we had you on our side. It's not guaranteed, but it does make the situation a little more controllable. I don't expect you to answer now. Why don't you take a few days and then give me a call once you've made up your mind, he said as he stood up and handed the blonde king a business card. Naruto looked over the card and saw magical runes etched into the card. I'll discuss it with my peerage and give you a call by tomorrow. If that's all, you're free to stay. There's plenty of food to go around. Naruto replied with his carefree persona back in place. Azazel smiled but shook his head. As fun as that sounds, I really must be heading back. If Shemazai finds out I was just hanging out, hell be pissed. Again, thank you for the food and I'll be expecting your call. The Mon's black wings sprouted from his back and he took to the skies. Naruto's eyes followed the man until he disappeared into the horizon and turned his attention back to the business card. He had to think about this. Thanks for watching.